Ooh,
We are streaming now. Allie, do you want to do a tweet?
yeah, one more tweet.
I think we're doing a stream. Yeah, we're doing a stream, it looks like to me.
Okay.
This looks like a stream to me.
It's looking also like that to me.
People are debating whether or not it's Bird Leader or Burb Leader, which is a new entry.
Oh,
Hmm.
ABN boss.
People are debating whether or not it's Bird Leader
Uh-oh.
or I forgot to hit Paul. I forgot to hit mute on my own dang thing. There we go. There was an echo for a hot second. Now there isn't.
I mean, there was one for the whole season, so.
Hey,
Good night, everybody.
that's it. That's it for us. I'm gonna wait until you do your tweet before we actually get
I had
kicking.
one tweet. I'm following up with another tweet. You were good to go.
All right. Welcome to the Friends at the Table Twilight Mirage post-mortem. We have finished Twilight Mirage, a game, a season in which we played a bunch of games. I'll just shout them out right away up top. We played The Veil by Fraser Simons. Simon, I'm forgetting. We played Scum and Villainy by Strauss Osimovic and John LaBouffe Little. We played Follow by Ben Robbins. We played Futura Free, which was a hack of D. Vincent Baker's Mobile Frame Zero Firebrands, and also a hack of The Quiet Year by Avery Alder. And I guess technically we did a quick session in Lady Blackbird for patrons that did a little half of a tiny side story. I think that is the whole of the games we played this season. Is there anything I'm missing? Okay. Sounds like no. Joining me today, Alicia Akampora.
Hi, that's me. You can find me at Allie_West on Twitter.
Also joining us, Andy Clare.
Hey, I'm Andy. You can find me on Twitter at Captain Trash, and you can listen to my other show, Emoji Rome, on Google Play or iTunes.
Andrew Lee Swan.
Hey, you can find me on Twitter at Swandre3000.
Art Martinez Tebble.
Hey, you can find me on Twitter at @ATable, and you can listen to One Song Only, which I hear is coming back.
Finally.
Now that some side project the people involved had is slowing down a little bit.
God. Jack DeKeat.
Hi, you can find me on Twitter at NotQuiteReal, and buy any of the music featured on the show at notquitereal.bandcamp.com.
Janine Hawkins.
Hi, you can find me at Bleating Heart on Twitter.
And Keith Carberry.
My name is Keith J. Carberry. You can find me on Twitter at Keith J. Carberry. You can find the Let's Plays that I do at youtube.com/runbutton.
And as always, you can find me on Twitter at Austin_Walker, and you can find the show at Friends_Table. Also, as always, you can support the show by going to friendsattetable.cash, where you will find basically a year's worth of live games, one a month, a lot of Bluff City episodes for people who don't know. Maybe they just started listening to the feed during Twilight Mirage and didn't ever check out Bluff City. Bluff City is a ongoing one-shot based campaign in which we kind of fill in the gaps of a mid-Atlantic gambling city, a sort of Atlantic City with the serial numbers filed down, but with a little bit more magic and a little bit more drama and a little bit more wrestling that is actually in Atlantic City, New Jersey. So you can check that out also at friendsattetable.cash, and there's a ton of other stuff. There's map maker stuff where you can see kind of character sheets and maps. We'll be updating that now that the finale is over with all of the maps from the finale. Dre did a really good job of taking pictures of the map as it updated throughout play, so I'm super excited to show people how it went from a pretty plain map to a place where there was a planet that had a body and a head and a smiley face to just all sorts of wild shit on that map. So look forward to that. And there's a bunch of other stuff on there too, so go check that out, friendsattetable.cash. We are currently behind on a number of things because of the finale, and are generally kind of thinking about how to rework some of that stuff and rework our workflows internally to make sure that we're up to date. Know that we are like that as a priority for us, and it's something that we're going to be addressing in the near future. So, all that business out of the way, let's talk about the Twilight Mirage. Does that sound good for everybody?
Yeah.
All right. I felt like maybe we should start at the very, very, very end because we had a number of questions, including this one from Nat, about the final sequence. Nat says, how did the ending sequence come to be? Like, it's amazing, and I cried whenever I listened to it, which I have like 3 times, but how did it happen? I love the show so much. Y'all are such beautiful, wonderful people. Thank you so much, Nat. I promise this was the only time we've ever... I'll include a big compliment like that, but it's like, okay, thank you. I mean it from my heart. I'd say, so like, Jack, Keith, and Allie, do you want to speak a little bit to this, to the kind of finale sequence?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can start, but it was kind of mostly y'all who worked on it. It started from the Future Free song, obviously.
Right.
Where we're like, this is such a good idea and we should use it for something, and this was the best version of that. And then was it just Keith or a combination of Keith and Austin who came up with the questions
All Keith.
specifically?
100% Keith. I kind of pitched it to Keith, and I was like, can you come up with like 5 questions for people? And Keith, you came up with 11? 15?
I came up with 15 and then lost all of them because my computer shut off, and then I had to rewrite
Right.
them.
Oh.
I got like 10 of the original 15, and then I wrote another 2.
Yes, yeah. And yeah, as Ali says, Futura Free as the song, the Frank Ocean song, was like the huge inspiration for it. There was I shared this in the Discord, but there was a night where I was walking around my neighborhood listening to that song, and I immediately like rushed. It was that song and also a podcast that gave me another different intro idea, which I'm not going to spoil here. But I rushed to our production chat and was like, we need to do an ending like this. But I actually didn't conceive of it as being the end of the season until a little bit later. And then, yeah, I was like, I trust Keith. Keith knows who Gig Kephart is way better than I do. Keith can come up with good Gig Kephart questions. And we did. And then I guess... Jack, we recorded for like 90 minutes, I think, total, right?
We recorded like an absurd amount of... We had like not a full recording because our full recordings are gigantic, but we had like a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And Ali edited all of that,
Right.
as in like made it all sound good, and then sent it to me as just sort of a big package, and I opened it up in Logic, and had the fun time of like editing human voices, which I never do.
Right.
Oh.
So like there was just a lot of like, oh god, right, people talk in a way that music doesn't. Like, music fits within bar lines or whatever, and people just talk, and I have to work out how to cut that in a way that sounds nice. And I produced a cut that was like, I misinterpreted what Austin had told me.
I
and
had
thought
said...
that-
Oh, I don't know about this.
I had said, like, oh, we just need to... So it was like 90 minutes of stuff or something, right? The raw or like the edited version that Allie put together. And either I or Allie or both of us had said, like, oh yeah, just put together like 5 to 10 minutes of it and work from there. And what we meant by work from there was like, and then pick out sentences that you think are good and toss them into whatever song you make. And Jack thought we meant make a 10-minute long song.
Well, and like, I had thought this when we were all hanging out together in New York or whatever. So,
Right.
like, in terms of my plans for what my production workload looked like towards the end of that season, I was like, holy lord, here we go. We're gonna have to like get this sorted. So it was kind of a relief when I got this thing done and I sent it off to Austin and said, it's 10 minutes. And Austin said, no.
No, what? No. And then the tricky thing was like, well, how do you cut it down from 10 minutes? And so then you asked me to step in and like take it from 10 minutes to, I like, this is the first time I've edited voices in this way too, right? It was like, how do you take this 10-minute thing that is just these conversations and try to find the bare skeleton of vocals for a music track without knowing much of the music track? And so I asked you to give me a skeleton of music, and so you sent me like 70 seconds of music, and I just put it on loop and cut and cut and cut, and ended up putting together just like what the order of questions are, how it's going from place to place, how it opens and ends. You knew to end it on the tender wake up thing,
like,
which is fantastic.
We got that fairly early in the files that I was listening to. This like, how do you feel about, do you prefer falling asleep or waking up question came up, and like everybody answered it, and everybody's answers were really cool. But Grand had that great answer about like waking up is just realizing you have stuff to do.
Right.
Which was like such a good grand answer. And then for Ali to have this other answer, which I like cut very slightly. I just changed the rhythm of it very slightly,
Yeah.
but in the original, it's still this very like contemplative, like considered answer. And it just felt like the way the season should end. Like the description of someone waking up and being excited about the day just like felt like the most natural place.
The best part about it is that like essentially Art and Allie gave the same answer, but
Right.
but having a different idea about having how having stuff to do feels
exactly. Yeah, totally. And I will say also real quick, there is no 10-minute track. Jack did not compose 10 minutes to it. That is not. It may have come across as the other way. We're not sitting on a 10-minute track. We would not have done that.
How long was it at the end? It was like 5 minutes. Is that
what's weird is it's like 6.5 minutes by the end, and the actual difference between a 6.5-minute track and a 10-minute track is kind of small at that point. But I think if I'd been told you have to do a 10-minute track, I'd have panicked way harder than if I'd been told you have to do a 5-minute track that with the intro and outro came to about 6.5 minutes.
Yeah. Right. And though you did also compose 3 minutes or whatever, 2 minutes before that from my improvised outro to the season, which you smartly said, like, don't do a different, and just do the one, we're going to do the one you said live to us while recording. We don't need to, like, make it better.
So, like, I heard that live, and I was in Washington, D.C., and we've been recording this finale for, like, 400 years.
Yep.
And
with water breaks.
With water breaks. And you delivered this ad-libbed monologue, and I was, like, choking up listening to it. And I was like, oh, right, I want to put music to this. I don't want to have a second take here. I don't want to lose whatever emotion that monologue carried that got me and hopefully other listeners to feel the way I did.
Right.
And then when I was writing it, the track that became like an anchor, I didn't feel that way at all. I just was like, oh God, I can't recapture this emotion whatsoever. And so it was an enormous relief when I sent it to you at the end of finishing it. And you were like, oh, I choked up, because I was like, all right. Okay.
Yeah, no, because I hadn't gone back to listen to that, and it's like the anchor outro, the track, the stuff that plays. I hadn't listened to that. Like, this is the first time I'm listening to the show actually in a concerted way as I prep for High Run. I'm re-listening to all of Winter. Normally I check in on certain bits and make sure certain scenes came out well or whatever, but I just don't have the time in my life normally to be like, I'm going to listen to this long show that we do, because I'm listening to other shows and working on the prep and all of that. But listening to that moment was just like, oh shit, okay, good, that came across, that worked. So I'm very happy about that. Yeah. So you all of you, like, I'm so happy how that whole thing came out. It was like a thought that I had 6 months ago or something now, and I was like, oh, I bet that would be good. And it was, because of the three of you, it was like so much better than I could have imagined. So shout outs to y'all. I'm gonna keep it moving because I'll just say right now, we got something like 235 questions.
And we will be answering them all
right now. Ready? Next one. No, we had to take a cut, right? Like, I had to take a cut. I had to make sure that I tried to pick questions. One, everybody went through and like, hey, these are questions we're interested in answering. And then two, on top of that, tried to pick questions that would give us the opportunity to answer themes of questions that we got a bunch of, right? That like, hey, here's a bunch of people asked about this thing. Here's a really good version of that question. Let's zero in on that. So the next one comes in, and it's going to continue the musical motif. In fact, very focused on motifs. From Ruby to Jack. Friends of the Table score always has great use of leitmotif, but in this season, every single character got their own little theme song, and the use of motif was so much more prominent. How do you think the use of motif impacted the soundtrack of the Twilight Mirage as a whole, or what was the thought behind the decision to make motif more heavy in this season?
It was a really complicated season, full of lots of complicated moving parts, and I think it became clear to me pretty early on that if I didn't have some method for anchoring ways to musically tell stories about characters and events, I would just go spiraling. I would go spiraling out, and I would have to be writing new melodies like constantly, which I sort of did, but by establishing broad motifs for this is what conflict in the Mirage sounds like, or this is what a sort of a peace sounds like. This is what it sounds like when people we care about are under threat.
Right.
This is what it sounds like when we're being threatening. And then just the more direct motifs of like, all right, fine, this is how I compose for Grand, and this is how I compose for Gig or Tender. And especially like Earth and Morning's Observation, like stuff like that, let me work more easily than it would be if I was having to write a new melody every time we came up with a new scene. Which is something that happens more regularly in Hyron, where the palette that I have is so much less, and I have to rely on different ways of telling stories. You know, by just being like, all right, fine, here's a new melody. I'm going to give you like a new theme or a new track.
Totally.
I think also I composed most of the soundtrack using Alchemy, which is a synthesizer in Logic. It is like an incredibly versatile digital synthesizer. And one of my favorite things about Logic is that it makes it very easy to identify a sound that appeals to you. It has something like 3,000 or 4,000 different like bass sounds. And then each one of those can be modulated across kind of 8 different ways. I can make the sound darker, I can make the sound more aggressive, or I can make it sound thinner. And so it was very easy for me to develop a motif that I liked and then work through a lot of different ways I could play with that sound, ways I could make that sound reflect different things. And I think that compositional process resulted in a lot more of these motifs because that process of creating it was so exciting.
Yeah, there was also something for me that I think really paid off was the character-based motifs. Obviously, we've done bits of that in past seasons, and there are certain instruments that make me think of different characters in, say, Counterweight, right? Like or different motifs. But here, I think because of this year of our stuff, or because of tracks like Mr. Magnificent and Elegy, there's stuff that ended up being really powerful in the finale. Because you could draw on a palette that people were already familiar with, that I as a listener was already familiar with. I think 80% of my Grand Echo ship is the play, and 20% is the music. So that is music as a powerful thing. All right, I'm gonna keep it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Well, I was just like, Grand and Echo is so much fun because Grand has that very like shallow, soft, high synth line.
Right.
This sort of pleading synth line, and Echo has that like unbelievably aggressive bass and
Right.
these very fast drums, and on their own they sound very they don't work super well, and then when I put them together I'm like, oh cool,
Right.
funny that.
All right, we're gonna keep moving because again we're gonna keep moving. So this one, Keith, you marked. This comes in from Saul, who says, "How did you decide on Gumption's fate in the Divine Principality?" And I tag you because I think we worked on this over the course of like a week, maybe longer, in terms of like coming from the recording. I think the way it's edited, it's not clear, but like we definitely kind of left it hanging with Gumption in a big way. And then you and I bounced ideas off of each other for like a week in terms of like, what do we deal with Gumption? In fact, during that week, I had forgotten that the DFS had completed that particular project. A lot of the other DFS stuff we had figured out, or I'd figured out, but like I didn't know what to do with Gumption. We tossed around a couple of ideas, but I'm curious, like, what sticks out for you here?
Yeah, so I guess that the biggest part was that like we kind of both forgot how it ended.
Yeah. We both.
Like, I think came to me with an idea, and I just was like, "Oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea." And then we were talking about it.
It's like the opposite idea, right? We both agreed to do a thing. So there's a line in the finale now that's like, Acre prevents the Divine Principality and the DFS from resurrecting the potency, right? And we're like, oh, and then Gig does the same, or Gig does that with Gumption. Gig prevents them from taking control of Gumption. Sick. And we're like, oh, wait, no. Like, no one stopped that clock. We both forgot that clock succeeded. They got Gumption, and you have to let the rules hang. Like, I wasn't going to go back and do a pickup where, for whatever reason, that clock failed to advance all the way. And instead...
so that's how it started was... I was going to do something with that clock, and then we ended up I ended up not having the resources to do it, and then it just got edited out and replaced. It was during the lawn games
thing, right? And it ended up being like, oh wait, you can't do that thing anyway. You can't do it by yourself. You don't have the resources for it. And so what else are you going to do instead? And so we ended up going with the long games thing. The long games thing is hilarious and funny and good because it suggests something about how the Choir do stuff, but it left open this question with Gumption.
Yeah. And so for a minute, we were operating on like a good Gumption ending. And then it was like, oh no, we can't do that. And then I can't remember what your original idea was. I guess it was that, because we were both like, well, how do we reconcile? Like, why would Gumption work with them?
Right.
I can't remember what your original thing was, but then I was like, what if they took apart his self-healing thing and put it in their mechs?
Yeah, I think you were like, I said, oh, this might be too positive given that the clock does finish for them. Because we talked about, like, well, maybe Gumption just leaves. It's like, well, they didn't, the players didn't earn that. Y'all didn't make that happen, so I can't just, like, oh, and then this time. Like, I think we get some questions later that are about, like, tone and about how to make the utopia. And one of the things that I'm committed to, or was committed to this season, I think the players super were, especially in the final act, was like, no, for things to happen, people have to do the thing, or society has to do the thing. And so, as much as I wanted to be like, oh, and Gumption's just too good-hearted to work with the DFS, which I think is true, what you said was, I think you're right, but the clock was only to steal the parts, right? So we'd still have to come up with a reason why Gumption would stay. I guess it's just like, well, this was my home now, and then you said, wait, maybe they rebuild Gumption as a new divine. Or he's different, not Gumption, or doesn't work right. And that's when we ended up going into this other thing. And you said, or they network his regenerative stuff into other divines. And I go, right, yeah, God, that's brutal, right?
Yeah,
because that confirms the end game that the divines were worried of. Like, it commits. That's what they were afraid of from the jump. That's what Anticipation is researching. That's what Pleroma is all about. That is why Independence left. And, like, it turns out they were right.
Yeah, and this is my petty behind the scenes ass angle, but I was also like, well, you guys didn't want to help me fucking save Gumption, then now Gumption's the worst possible. He gets the worst possible outcome he could possibly get.
Right. Well, and
it is. I think this is the worst thing I can imagine for Gumption.
For Gumption, 100%, and I think
for
it's
any divine.
Right, which is why Independence leaves, right? Like, and again, I think we'll wrap back around and talk about this in a little bit. So I'm going to save some. The fear of the divine, the DFS in general, like what happens to the DFS, and we'll get back to like why does that happen to them? What is it that fails for that society? So yeah, we'll get there. A lot of people taking ghosts in the chat, a lot of contempt. All right,
I love the ghosts. I'm glad that that's stuck.
Yeah, so we're here right now, right? Which is Alistar writes in and says, was it possible for the group to have averted the formation of the Divine Principality or the Rapid Evening in DFS going in that direction, given how long in the future that occurred? Would it have come down to not engaging with the DFS in such a detrimental way regarding stealing Gumption, or would they have had to make more of an active effort? As the GM, the DFS, the Divine Principality didn't exist until after our final recording. Like, I didn't know who they were until we finished, and I went, oh shit, and then I immediately DM'd Allie, I think, and was like, I know who this group is that for a future season that I've been thinking about. But I guess that you were even in the recording, I was like, I think this is what happens with them. So that wasn't a plan in any way. Like, I had a feeling that the Rapid Evening would in some way be around, but you know, the Divine Free States could have gotten removed from the board by Signet or something when that card got pulled up. I don't think that's what would have happened. Or the Rapid Evening could have, right? Like, I can imagine a world in which Grand Magnificent or like somebody else draws the card and is like, well, let's just get rid of Crystal Palace. Let's use that card to just completely wipe that. And so, no, nothing is sketched in stone in that way, right? And so, for me, as the player side, or from the GM side, I would have loved to have seen people engage with like, well, okay, what's happening in the DFS? How do we build that? Because for me, the core of this season, the core of the season's view of Utopia hinges on literally building things and doing things at a cultural level. The DFS falls apart because Utopia for them was not about a psychological state. It was about having good roads. It was about having good healthcare. It was the utopia of the Divine Fleet was the Divines, right? it was Contrition's figure, and it was Contrition's figure working with Contrition. It was mercy. It was potency. It was curiosity leading them places from place to place to place instead of letting people fall into their behaviors of wanting to sit still. The Divines did things that people couldn't do and encouraged the best possible behaviors and were literally a social safety net, right? And so when the social safety net is destroyed, it's not surprising to me, or specifically in Twilight Mirage, the thing that happens is people get grounded to this other thing. And I think that that's in direct opposition to Counterweight, where in Counterweight, the point that we kind of make is like, no, people can change the world through action. People can, like, with a fire in their heart and collaboration, can just make things better. And here we're saying, like, okay, sure, but without the structures that they build to make things better, it's just that easy to fall apart. And so you start to see Nadeo in, episode descriptions talk about how we're going to ground with or without the Cadent, and you start to see them being willing to throw lives away and to work with people who go against their morals and stuff like that, because it kind of happens in that slow background way. And so it would have needed to get players involved in the DFS in that way. But because of just the way the season had gone, I don't think anyone was interested in the DFS outside of protecting lives, which like you did in that great debate scene, Echo. Any other thoughts on the DFS, or like wanting to work with the DFS or stop them here?
I think a big thing about the DFS is like, there's not like a switch that flips where it's just like
right
from Utopia to not Utopia. Like there's a slide.
Yeah.
And like we started the season with them being like, can we just go to these guys' planet and be on their planet instead of, like, that's how it starts. So it's
right.
like it's not like they were ever on that great of a foot to begin with for the whole season.
Right. They'd already again, like, I think it's two things. Like, one, it's like we were already seeing them in decline, which was the pitch of the show. When we first pitched it was like a utopia under threat and in decline. What do you do to try to protect it? And what Nadeo does is like decide not to protect that part of it at all and protect the state instead of protecting the values. And I guess the last thing there is, I don't think it was just... The thing that I think about a lot with them, especially with the point you just made about gumption, is that the utopia was a utopia. It was truly, really good for people. It also never, ever really engaged with its original sin of refusing to let divines die, or deciding that divine death was supposed to be taboo. And in some sense, it's a fruit from a poison tree, right? Like, it is... for me, similar to, not identical to, but the way in which I don't think America has engaged really, truly with the cost and the ways in which it was founded on slavery, right? And so at some point, it's like, well, you have to fucking deal with that or not, which is why so much of Signet's stuff with Awakened Cadent felt so important. Because like, all right, let's give this another try, but from the jump, we have to reimagine what the relationship is between people, between non-divines and divines, if that makes sense. Any other thoughts here?
Nadeo always sucked.
Nadeo always sucked. Ever since episode
and
one.
Sucked in the same way. Sucked in, like, one of the first interactions that Signet had with anyone in this season was going to him saying, hey, I'm worried that someone's going to come assassinate or kidnap or whatever our leader. Can you get me into these box seats? And he was like, if you do some errands for me.
Yeah, what can I get from it? Totally.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to keep moving. Let's move into a new subject. Loose threads and other notions. Rowan, I'll keep building on this with you, Signet. Was it a conscious decision not to include Bellegarde in the second half of the season?
It's yes and no, right?
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
There's like two sort of answers to that, of just like, on the one hand, I totally, and this came up a lot, I wanted more scenes with Signet and Bellegarde because it felt a little weak to be sort of building this really strong foundation of like divines need to be seen as equals, etc. with Signet, while not giving Bellegarde that sort of equal treatment. There'd be a lot of cases where I'd say, like, I want to talk to Bellegarde about this, and then you would say, like, oh, well, she agrees with Signet probably, right? And it's like, on the one hand, yes, probably, but on the other, it's hard to see independence without dissent.
Wait, you
So
you
that
just
was
mean lowercase I
no, I mean,
independence?
yes, yes, yeah. But the other side of that is like that with Bellegarde active and not just a sort of passive figure, it really fucks with the balance of things. And to correct the balance by having Bellegarde around and doing stuff actively would be to, in some ways, contradict the significance that we've put on divines.
Right.
Um, so there's like no happy compromise.
Right,
I mean,
there's
the
that
happy compromise there is that Bellegarde is busy.
there. It's like right, yeah. Well, like the moment there was a moment in the micro arc with you and Tender on Altar when you're going towards the Vault of Anticipation, where early on we're like, hey, is Bellegarde here? And it was one of those moments where it was like, well, I could imagine there being good scenes with Bellegarde here. I know what's going to be in that vault. It's called the Vault of Anticipation. Like, and we all know we're going to go see Anticipation here. But also, it didn't feel honest to have Bellegarde there, right? And also felt like, I think the point that you made was like, I don't want Bellegarde near fucking these people from the Waking Cadent, and the Method of Apotheosis here,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I think that's. I still think I mean, we'll get here again later, but like it was a big season. It was a long season, and it's so hard to be like, okay, well, what would I cut to include more Bellegarde? But I would like to have. I definitely think that's a space where it's like you and I should have sat down and be like, okay, is there a better downtime action that we could figure out? Not a better or an additional downtime action or something that made you.
Yeah,
That,
it
that,
was a thing that I
yeah.
always been considering, but we didn't actually have that many downtimes. So
No.
it was, and there were usually other
three,
things that had to
right?
take- Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
it's, if we'd had 4, maybe.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
But-
that's the wildest thing is this show went forever, and also there's like a total of 7 arcs or 6 arcs or something.
Yeah.
It's just it's a lot of time.
If we'd had a little more downtime, there would have been more Bellegarde time, and also probably another trip to a brothel, guaranteed.
Almost certainly. Just again, fill in that blank space. Earlier in chat, people were getting excited because I said that I ship Echo and Grand. Y'all are allowed to just do that. Like I'm not just allowed. I encourage you to find those headcanons and treat them as real in your heart in the same way that I think, yeah, of course Signet went to more brothels, right? Like there's a sort of like in a TV show, you sometimes see someone do a thing once or twice, and it's supposed to set up the presumption. Like, think about watching a TV show like Law and Order SVU, when, like, a character goes to a baseball game for their kid. That doesn't happen every episode, but they're going to more than one baseball game, unless that episode is about them not going to the baseball games, All right, next question. Very important one here. I want to make sure I didn't skip any. I did. We're going to go back. Sorry. We'll get there. We'll get to that good one. We will. Eli says, players, is there an aspect of the world or your PC's backstory that never came up on air that you wish had? And I bring this up because not everybody had Bellegarde, but I'm sure other people had similar things that didn't get the screen time that you maybe thought of it.
I spent a decent amount of time thinking about like how society was kind of like structured in the Ever Forward, and I don't know if I ever came down with anything concrete, but I had this idea of it being like way more interdependent, and like families being a much more kind of like fluctuating and free-form thing, and it's not like you have 2 parents and like your siblings and like, but like the idea that like it was just like, I don't know, almost that like as you were growing up, you would like just kind of like bounce from like house to house and like place to place, and that there was just a lot less kind of like structure and more of just like, I don't know. Like I said, I never came down with anything concrete.
Yeah, that's a cool direction though.
Yeah, I definitely had this idea of the Everforward being a like radically interdependent kind of place as far as social structures are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's interesting, especially given like the physical shape of it, and given the nature of the group as being filled with explorers, and researchers and people working in different sorts of, or not working in, but living in that sort of exploratory mode, and not just it being part of their daily work. Is really, and also just anytime someone is like, families work different here, I'm like, my ears perk up. I'm like, oh, word, let me hear that. Let me get that info. Any other aspects of the world or your PCs that never came up? I have one for sure, which is a simple one. it is the phone booths that you have to call from one ship to the other that Allie pitched in the world creation, which I think
Oh God, I
yeah.
forgot about those.
not me. Like it is 100%.
Or like the ship, the old-fashioned ship intercom system.
That stuff too,
right?
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the idea was very much like you had to go to a specific phone booth on a ship to get in touch with another ship in the fleet. And I think we can talk about this later too, I'm sure. It's just like we ended up being so rarely in the fleet for a bunch of reasons that largely had to do with what I thought the pacing would be, and needing to deal with the fact that no, actually the pacing is going to be way slower than I think it is. I'm not going to have time to just do the regular ass seance game that I thought, and because of that we didn't get a lot of that stuff, and I wish we had. I totally wish that I had realized some of the pacing issues with the season earlier, so that instead of getting, I don't know, like I am happy to have had the Contrition's Figure arc and the Provine arc. But I want more time. I want more time so that it would be easier to do that stuff too, you know? Any other stuff from backstory or world?
I like set Signet up to be a good vehicle for like some good old fashioned like Catholic body horror, and then we just like never got into that.
With like,
it
wait,
would have been a thing.
I don't know
It would
about
have been
this.
no, you do. It would have been a fun thing to sort of. We never talked about like the nature of her lifespan, how she was living that long, and it worked out. It ended up being a good sort of like. It ended up being a good thing to, like you were saying, the death of divines being taboo, like the death of an excerpt.
Right.
It's a good
Yes,
like counterbalance to that, and also the stuff with Bellegarde.
We never found Signet's like original hand that had become a relic that was passed around.
Yeah, that was. I think I mentioned before that I like my original vision for Signet was like her religious duties being like walking in a parade, surrounded or like being followed by a bunch of cases with like mummified, body parts like Catholic relics and stuff. And I just wanted like hundreds of them. Just like a constant churn of these horrible, old body parts that had been cast off and replaced.
Yeah, that shit's sick. That shit's the best like because
never got to that.
I'm not here to retcon stuff, but imagine that happens sometimes because that casts the iconoclast stuff in such a different light.
Yes.
Once you are able to be like, no. Bodies in general are horrific. We all, everyone involved in this formula between Signet and the iconoclasts has some body shit going on. Is super, super, super good. Anything else before I move on? All right. Go.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I guess not really.
Art.
I had something and now I'm bailing on it. Like,
what? Okay. Thanks, Grand.
Yeah, you got it. But like, I guess I sort of. Wait. I want to make sure this isn't going to come up later in the.
Just say the thing. Just say it at this point, Art.
Okay, we're not. Yeah. I sort of wish that we'd gotten some time on Memorius.
Oh, sure, totally.
I sort of wish that we got to see that boring world that Grand wanted to buck against so badly.
Yeah, that's a really good one. In terms
of
just
the very dear to my heart sibling I invented in the last 8 hours of us doing Twilight Mirage.
Yeah, I wish I'd known about that sooner. That would have been a good pressure to put on Grand Magnificent.
Again, I didn't come up with it until I was driving the morning of the last session. I was like, oh, that's a good name.
Yeah. Atez in the chat says, and Crown. Crown is the place I least worried about showing because that's basically what you saw in the first half of the game. The ground game in the sculpture became Crown. So it ended up being okay, if I'm not going to be able to run this game for 2 years. 1.5 or 14 months is already a long ass time. Which are the planets we're not going to fucking see? I guess it's Crown. Sadly. So, I love Crown, and I'm one day maybe we'll revisit it in a side game or something. Any other stuff before I move on? Okay. This comes in from Alex/Dora. Tender was a cat girl. What animal people would the other PCs be? Yes, I'm asking what their personas are.
I'm a bug.
In general, or
just in general?
Yeah.
What's your bug's persona?
Oh, Wait, hold on.
Give us a furry bug or get the hell out of here. A bug
Are
with
there
fur.
furry bugs beside like spiders aren't bugs, I know, but that's like the only like
Moths?
insect
There's furry
adjacent. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
moths.
there's moths.
Moths are
So-
good.
They got wings. So there
Moths
we
got
go.
wings. They got big
Caterpillars.
antennas.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a moth. There we go.
Okay, so
Even at the
Dre-
beginning of
so
the season, it's a
Dre is
caterpillar,
even-
then becomes a moth.
Dre is even, and even is a bug, and even's bugs persona is a moth.
Yes.
Okay.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
Anybody else? This
Yeah,
is a
I think
required
Grand
question.
Magnificent is obviously a beaver. The
Oh my
architects of the
God.
animal kingdom.
I do associate beavers really closely with flannel, so that does. kind of
Oh,
work.
you know?
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
You saved that one for me. You really did.
You
Is
don't
Sig-
spend enough time in the Midwest or Canada, which are the places where the beavers are wearing flannel.
right, of course, it's fashionable there. Signet, are you just a beetle? Is that too easy, though?
I don't know.
Or a
I'm
butterfly?
torn. There's a butterfly that I was gonna like make a reference to at some point, and then I never did. And people like tweeted it at me, and it was really hard not to be like, I got it. There's like a butterfly that like makes a cocoon that looks like it's made of gold.
Mm,
It's called Mechanidas polymnia, and it's also polymnia is a reference to polyhymnia, which I think is the muse of like religious songs or something.
that sounds
there's
right.
some-
Yeah, sure.
But Even's already a bug, so like I mean, I named her Signet because I could do like the candidate,
Oh,
like
right.
you know, it's a homonym,
Homophone.
homophone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think a homonym is written the same way. Homophone sounds the same.
right.
Oh, it's like a candidate name.
Yes,
Yeah.
Jack.
Yes, Jack. It's like a candidate name. It's a signet like a swan.
Like a swan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the joke.
that was the thing.
Phoenix down. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. All right, I still need some more. I still need 14, 15. I still need Echo and Gig.
And Tender.
No, Tender is a cat girl. It says it on the screen.
But I mean, you know.
Even
But if
had
you had to-
two.
All right, I guess Tender could also have a different. I actually don't.
Twist. Tinder's persona is a dog.
Right, but I want to be very clear. I just want to be very. We talked about Tender deciding to be a cat girl, right?
Yeah.
And it's
yeah.
like
Yeah,
part
yeah,
of that
Oh,
was
she specifically didn't. That
Oh,
was
what?
Tender's thing. Yeah.
I misremember this entirely. Why? Okay, did she not want to be a cat girl?
She definitely wanted to be a cat girl, but she was
Oh.
also like a descendant of cat girls.
Oh, that wasn't. Okay, well, I knew she didn't. I knew it wasn't like VR cat girl, but I'd always assumed it was like, oh yeah, I became a cat girl. I didn't know that she was born a cat girl.
Episode 0, we
Okay.
discussed this, and I was like, no, this is specifically we had animal people in counterweight.
Yeah,
and
totally.
on a long
right.
enough timeline.
Yes, totally.
Oh,
Well, then
I
I do.
remember that.
Sounds like she needs a persona.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm gonna go last.
All right. Well, for now, let us know how many ears Tender has. Important question that did come in from a couple of places,
Oh,
including
God.
Zoe.
Fuck up. No, I just
Oh,
whatever.
you don't have
come on,
to answer
friends,
Wait,
this.
are you saying
they're
like
Okay.
there?
the best
Is
ones.
it 2 cat ears or is it 2 human ears and
No,
And
two
Keith,
cat
we do
ears?
not need to.
I
That
just
is
want
the
to know
question,
how does
right,
that.
Keith?
We've already touched on body horror once this stream. We can do it again. It's fine.
I just want to know like what would.
Oh, that's
what
the thing,
would
it's
prompt
for-
someone needing to know how many ears because I would have just assumed
Are-
2 forever.
She just keeps extra ears in cases that Signet. gave
Oh
her.
my
She's got, like
God.
14 pairs of ears.
15, 14, 15, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
All right, so I need 14, 15. I need Grand. No, I got Grand. I need 14, 15. I need Echo. I need Tender. I need Gig. This is supposed
I
to
don't
be a
want to go
quickie.
yet because I have an answer, but I want to think of a better
my
one.
God.
A bird. I think a bird. I fought a bird, which is like.
Yeah,
I
it's like
don't know if fought is the right word. A bird nearly killed me.
That's
so I
how
don't
you become
necessarily...
a bird.
Yeah.
Is that really?
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Holy shit.
that's why
I've
there's
been
so
chased
many
by a
birds
goose.
because of all the people through all of time that
Who
have had
killed
to
by
fight a bird.
birds.
I think, but I don't think I'd be a bird like Kichikana. I think like a stork or something. You know.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Maybe the answer is like different birds each time. So like, I guess like that bird that kills snakes, and then like a peacock or something.
Really
and
revealing
then,
your
like,
biases here, Jack. Your anti-snake biases.
And then,
Your first bird choice was
Yeah, my
A
third
bird
bird
that-
would be a mongoose. That'd be a mongoose bird.
oh god, and then wait, so and the body politic would be just like a stork or a crane, and then what's the biggest bird? What's the beefiest bird?
Harpy
Ostrich?
eagle.
One of those.
Yeah.
would be the coconut sandcloud.
what about condor? It has a C in it. All right. We still need a few more here.
I was thinking a gazelle. I wanted something fast.
Yeah.
I wanted something that could run fast.
Yeah.
Like an ibex.
No, not that one. Specifically, not that one. I just don't like how that sounds. You know.
How about ibex?
That sounds a lot better. Maybe I'll think about it.
Okay.
Come back to me. We'll get back to this at the end of the show.
All right.
I almost started telling an anecdote that I can't tell on mic, so I'm having a great evening.
Okay.
I have an answer.
Tender.
Tender as a person is a sliding scale between Bone Bone the cat and
Yeah.
Lizzo, a fantastic rapper.
Oh, sure.
But Tender's persona is more like Cat Jazz, the Instagram/Tumblr cat who's like staring intensely at those
Oh,
pancakes.
I
And that's
don't
my
know
answer.
this.
The Russian cats.
You
The
know
pancake
Cat Jazz.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I
Looking
don't
at the
know cat
blinis?
names. I don't know names of cats.
Okay. Fair.
Oh, it is looking at the blinis.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, this is a good one. I like this one quite a bit. Love
You've
it.
seen the video, right, of the guy describing the picture?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Or he likes it because he's like, oh, I relate because we all want them.
We all
He's
want
got them and
pancakes.
we all want to have them.
He's specifically like, you think it's a happy expression, but it could be forlorn because it could have the.
Very.
Wait, so is your persona a different cat?
Yes, it
Yeah.
sounds like it is.
Uh huh.
I don't think that works.
It
It
works.
absolutely works.
Cats are varied. There's lots of them.
But like,
Uh huh.
does that mean that someone's persona could just be a different person?
A tiger's persona could be a lion.
I don't like
We
this.
can all agree to that, right?
We're moving on.
Guess I can
Internet
agree
gig.
to that.
Okay, so I figured out a better answer for myself, and I think that gig is some sort of weasel, some kind of like a ferret or maybe a stoat. I like stoats. And I've learned this. There's a kind of weasel called a least weasel, which is, I think, the real world equivalent of Richard Scarry's lowly worm.
I think that's that little hoppy
least
one.
weasel.
That's the little hoppy one.
Yeah,
I
it's
Oh,
used
look
to.
at this
smallest
cute
Yeah.
little baby.
Yeah,
I would like the most weasel.
I think that's a polecat is the
Jack.
most weasel.
Good news. The least weasel, or simply weasel in the UK. Oh.
Why did you guys look at that weasel and go like, that is the
That's
least weasel?
I
We
think
must have
it's
more
the, it's the
weasel here.
smallest.
Do you have more weasels?
There's a lot of
Yes.
kinds of weasels. Yeah.
I
There's
guess
stoats,
so.
There's polecats. There's there's ferrets.
The least
Yeah, that whole mustelid family is a pretty robust one.
Yeah, there's a lot of different. I'm one of those.
I was
I
looking
maybe
at a picture of the Bangs weasel, and I thought it was two. I thought it was one weasel that was really buff, but it was just two together fighting.
I'm sorry, did you call it the Bangs weasel? Is that
That's
a
what
thing?
it's called, the Bangs weasel.
Like
Wait.
it has like hair, like it has bangs?
No, it's as in it belongs to
The
to Bangs.
bangs.
Oh.
But also not as in that
Weasel.
weasel fucks.
No.
We're
I
moving
wanted it to
on.
have like hair. Okay.
Is it cool looking?
It looks
You can
alright.
give any weasel
weasel.
bangs, I think.
No, this hair's not long.
Siri writes in and asks Andy and Jack, did you think of your characters as disabled?
Yes, absolutely.
You want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, 100%. I think that the playbook that starting from a playbook perspective of looking through the characters that were interesting to me, and this character being described that had a chronic health condition, was really interesting. But something that was kind of central to my thinking about that character from the start was that was something that had to be considered in the way we thought about it, in the way we told. Like we couldn't just pick that character and go like, right, they're an assassin.
Right.
And in the same way that in the post-mortem, when you asked like, what happens to 14, the most honest answer I think was the one that I gave.
Or in the finale, not the.
Did I say
Post-mortem is
post-mortem?
You
Yeah.
did. I was like, wait, did I miss something?
No. No. I think though that something that I wish I had been better at during the season was working more actively to examine the ways that 14's disability allows them to engage with the world and how
Yeah.
the world around them engages with them. Like towards the end of the season, I got a great email being like, "Hey, here's how you're talking about 14 at the moment. Is this how you intend to be talking about 14 and 14's disability?" And it got me thinking about the ways in which I wasn't and the ways in which that I had been. We were talking about parts of our character's backstory that we wish we'd seen on screen, and I think something that I wish I'd seen more of is the ways, positive and negative, that the fleet responds to people like 14.
Mhm.
In a situation where these digital bodies and virtual and real spaces are blurred, I would imagine that there would be a broader response. What is happening to 14 and what 14 is experiencing is probably not something that is unique. And we know in the world that there are people like Castle Rose who are quite willing to continue to take advantage of that.
Right.
Castle Rose knows exactly what's happening.
100%. Yeah.
And is like, is like, right, well,
It's like the
wanna do some
closest
more
thing
killing of people?
I think we've ever had to a complete and total villain, in a way that even Kitchakana was not as cruel and like there's a level of detachment that Kitchakana achieves for himself by becoming a crime lord, by becoming like the head of this group inside of the Mirage. Casseroles has no problem just being personally the fucking worst, you know?
Yeah, totally. And I think, but I think something that I wish I'd done was look in the other direction. And we
Right.
got part of that in the sense that we know that the crew of the Notion cares about 14 and understands to an extent, or not even pretends to understand, but is experiencing some fraction of what 14's experiencing as they are. And while we got some measure towards talking about that with things like the fisherman saying like, "Hey, keep notes,"
Right.
I don't know whether or not that goes as far as I wish that we had gone in terms of talking about how 14's disability affects them in the context of the Twilight Mirage. And that's tricky. That's tricky to toe the line of how to tell that story, but it's something that I went into the season thinking this is something that I'd like to do, and came out of it thinking this is something that I did a bit. This is something that I did somewhat.
Right. Totally. Always room for improvement on this stuff, and also room for figuring out strategies ahead of time instead of reactively, which is, there's always a degree of reaction, but I think it's one of the most important lessons I think for the season for me is like identify, but this goes back to the very first episode that we recorded that we ended up tossing, was like, or maybe it wasn't the first one we recorded, but it was like, oh shit, I should have looked closer at the empath book. I should have seen this dilemma coming, which we've talked about at this point, that like we didn't use the empath playbook from the Veil, because we ended up changing characters and re-recording an episode because there was an issue with it that dealt with consent that none of us had anticipated. I think the same thing can go here, which is like, okay, we did know going in that we wanted to represent the dying as someone with a chronic illness, who we thought about that actively, and that we framed scenes around, and we thought about it that way. But there were definitely things where like a little more research would have gone a long way, and even just having the conversations that we did end up having, like the second half of the season, especially going into the finale, you and I did have that conversation, Jack, which was like sometimes even on air, which was like, does this frame it in a good way? Does this frame it in a way that feels honest but also feels thoughtful, and is not manipulative, and is, trying to explore it and not just leverage it?
Yeah. I think the thing that I tried to keep as a guiding principle was that I we saw 14 in a very interesting time in their life and a
Right.
very interesting point in history for the Mirage.
Yeah.
And I didn't, or I tried really hard not to make the story one of someone who is losing or is getting further away from what they are. Or losing or getting further away from themselves. I didn't
Yeah.
want it to be this story of somebody gradually becoming less. And I think that by situating 14 in this place where we were able to tell stories about trying to make things grow and trying to make things, trying to cultivate things, was important in terms of guiding my thinking of how can I create a character who is trying to discover things and is trying to add to themselves and is trying to take things on as they go.
Right. Yeah.
Also, people are saying I'm kind of going in and out of volume wise. That's because I have very bad mic technique, especially when I'm trying to think very hard. I'm sorry about that.
That happens. Andy, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, for sure. Let me just figure out where to start because it's such a broad thing, especially with Echo here. I definitely, when we first started, the honed playbook especially sort of, it was a little weird when I just read it like out of nowhere. I'm trying to think of the right word, but like read it like site Reddit, I guess is the closest thing I've got to what I'm trying to say here. But like just looking at the play sheets and seeing that one, and when I decided it, I wanted to try and do my best to stay away from having a character with a like weaponized disability.
Right.
Which is a thing that like happens a lot in fiction, where it's like a character has whatever sort of condition, and it turns into like they make it into a weapon or something. Like for example, I think like what's his name in Game of Thrones, who got his hand cut off, is a big example of that. Is from what I know, is just, and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't treated like a superpower, but as a thing that is very tangibly affected this person's life and is something that they struggle with because of the way people treat them based on how they were born, and the fact that they're in Echo's case, like specifically, they don't like interact with the world the same way that everybody else does.
Right.
Specifically because they're missing their nanites, like in fiction, but also like I used a lot just to get into like stuff that influenced it. Specifically, I used a lot of just like, I struggle a lot with learning disabilities. Like I've got several, and it is obviously a much more minor version of this, but it is something that I struggled with in like school. People being like, "Oh, I don't get why you can't see this the way other people do."
Right.
And taking that and blowing it up to being something much more bigger and much more intense is how, like, one of the ways that helped me make sure or at least try to do a good job with this. I also just wanted to make sure that, like, it never felt like Echo being super strong was tied to them not having nanites. I wanted to make that very clear that was the separate part of their origin. Because there's nothing worse than being like, yeah, you were born different and that makes you super strong. It's not just lazy writing, it's also very othering in a way that people don't realize is really insulting.
Yeah. One of the things that I was really appreciative from you as a player was, so one of the I have a friend named Jeff who's in disability studies as an academic, and one of the things that, in speaking with Jeff about this stuff, one of the things that he really emphasized with me was there's a bunch of stuff ranging from disability as kind of societal category and stuff like that. Like, it was a really, really useful and insightful conversations. But one of the big ones was like, you can and should show disabled people engaging with technologies to address their disability. And that there can be a range of those things. Those things can change over the course of a story. And that the best way to handle, having disabled characters in your story is, like with many marginalized identities, to include multiple people so that there's different perspectives, right? And so on one hand, we have someone like Cascara who is in a wheelchair through the entirety of the season, and we also have someone like Echo who slowly uses different technologies, ranging from the eye patch to the heads-up display, to the weird VR room in Sculpture City, to address the disability, or to not to address the disability, but as living with disability. Those are technologies that they put to use. And I really loved the way that you kind of foregrounded that stuff in your play, because it helped remind me to think about the character's disability as something that they were actively living with, and not just something on a character sheet, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that came through.
100%. All right. Next question comes in from Thomas, who says, "What is your favorite decision another character made?" It's an open question. Anybody who has something that jumps to mind?
I've got one.
Sure.
Signet deciding that things were going to pop off. And,
Sure.
Signet deciding that this was a drunken yelly holiday instead of a holiday classic.
Instead of just a happy one.
Or like everyone snipes at each other and is kind of just salty holiday.
Right. Yeah, that was a big one, and was absolutely a big decision that I think somehow took me by surprise, though even listening back to that whole episode is like, no, there was a build. There was a build and a reveal.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have one?
This is kind of, like, it's not specific enough, so I'm sorry if it's a bit of a cop-out, but the mission where we were trying to free the, or 2 weeks out and I've already forgotten all the names, the Wandering Ocean in space. We constantly kept escalating stuff. Like, everybody else kept just adding things. Even, obviously, for people who've listened, really escalated stuff at one point.
God, that whole sequence.
I thought, like, dramatically, I really loved what we did there, and I really loved how willing everybody was to just go for it.
To, like, play into their statuses, especially with even deciding, like, yo, I'm going to fucking kill some Advent, I'm obsessed with this, and Gig being like, I'm reckless. This is what that looks like. That isn't a fun thing. That's just like, oh, I'm goofy. I'm a goofy, reckless guy. Like, no. Like, this is what it means.
Yeah, sincerely, Keith managed to, like, really balance both the silliness and the scariness of that.
It's so scary. I was so scared.
And how scary is it when someone's being silly while they're being scary?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like, please take this seriously. This is not good for anybody. And, like, to face that down with, no, actually, I'm like, committed to being goofy about this in the worst possible moment, really functioned well in that sequence. Anybody else have an answer for this?
I have one. This is another weird one because we didn't know about it until afterwards, but I don't think I've ever been as surprised by anything in any role-playing game as I was when Art was like, "Oh yeah, Grant's robot at the party was a bomb." That was a bomb robot, and
It's so good.
I don't think I've never been at as much of a loss.
Sometimes you just have a bomb.
Thank you for not thinking that as a sloppy retcon, because I sort of didn't tell anyone and didn't write it down. So you all had to believe me.
No, I totally believed you.
Oh, so good.
I really like that Tender didn't tell Signet what she learned about the waking cadence, because it's like the easiest thing in the world, and I do this a lot of just like, one of the core moves that we make is gathering information, and then there is a like, do you tell everyone? And the answer's like, yeah, and then you move on.
Yep.
So it's really easy to just kind of not think about that, but that's not really what people do a lot of the time, especially when it's a thing that is like really big and intense, and like you want to just sit with it for a bit because it doesn't feel real,
Totally.
So the fact that Tender sat on that, I admit I did like find it fun in a way to be mean when it was revealed. To grind my heel a bit into Tender's back. But that was a really interesting choice that led to a lot of real interesting stuff down the line.
Yeah, I mean, like, it leads to all of the great stuff in the Temple of Pleroma, where you're literally like, no, I'm gonna fucking make you do it. Like, I'm not giving you the out, and it's so fucking good. It's so good.
There was, when I was editing that at some point, I was like, are Janine and Austin just dual GMing me? Okay, sure. But like, yeah, I think I'm gonna do the fake thing and do the opposite. It's not fake. See, Janine like really pressuring me on that was really good, because it was like Tender not being able to talk about it, and then eventually just being like, but Signet, I expect you to take care of me.
Right.
It was like the best version of that episode. Because like there's the version of Tender who could be like, I idolize you, and I'm having a hard time with this. Like, that's not who that character ever would have been.
Totally.
And at that point, like Signet being cold, it just worked out, and I'm happy that we found
and primes Tender for the final act turn, right? Of like, oh, okay, like, I'm gonna have to do some work here, and then it becomes, oh, I'm gonna do all of the work that there is. I'm just constantly gonna be doing this. Is a really great pivot. I love it. Any other lingering answers here?
I really liked the cascade of poor decisions Tender made during the milk arc.
No.
Oh my god, it's so good.
Starting with when Keith was saying I've never been as surprised on the show as I was when Gran did the bomb. The moment when Tender suggested that we should make the possibly world-ending gun in an attempt to like try and lure out the person.
Never.
The fact that you floated a plan similar to that.
I thought in that moment, I swear to God, I was like, oh my god, did they kill the people? Are they the people who kill the people?
Right. I was like, are we doing a Minority Report situation here in which we are the
killers?
Guy?
Yeah.
And that was just a situation I find myself in a lot. And I think I talked about this on a tips recently, is that I, Jack Keith, am just delighted by something that is happening. Right. And my character is like, I have never heard a worse idea. And I think that the milk arc with Tender's ridiculous gun plan, and then Tender just going on a small beach holiday and revealing everything about our secret plan was good. Just like an extremely joyful session that 14 hated.
Is anyone left? Trey, and I think maybe just you and me.
I enjoyed a lot of. I wasn't in this arc, but the arc where the team had to just work with a bunch of kids that owned their own.
God, that whole sequence. Yes.
Like, I think I messaged you, Austin. I was like, oh my God, I am glad I'm not in this, because like this would fuck me up so bad, because I was still like working with kids as my job. But like, oh man, yeah, there were so many good moments where it's like, it's a kid. Like, that's not like another like adult be saying this sideways shit to you. It's just a kid, and this is what kids do.
Yep, totally. I have two. I'm cheating because I want to do one from. I want to do two. I'm gonna do two because I want to do two. That's why. One is the decision during the holiday special. In the Dragon game, which is the Grand Even Signet game, of Grand putting in the Black Stone in the final challenge and saying, I don't want this to succeed. It still succeeded at a cost, but it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, we are getting into who this character really is now, and taking the more risky and daring and honest option. And I really, really, really appreciated that a whole bunch. I have a second one, and I'll remember it in a moment. Fuck. I forget it.
The thing I'll A thing I'll say while you're thinking is that art is, I think, maybe one of the best, if not the best of us at being honest in play about what a character is doing, even when it's like, oh, this is so bad. This is...
Hadrian doesn't know he rolled a 1 situation.
Yes,
Oh, right. Yeah.
exactly.
Totally.
He's like very good at, just very, very good. It's a very like aspirational thing to see those bad choices play out sometimes. Because it's like, I want to be that honest in play too.
Yeah, and it's hard to do that.
Yes.
I forget what the second one is. If it comes back to me, I will stop the car in the tracks, and say it. But if nobody else has one, I'm going to move on. All right. This one comes in from Tim. What was your favorite name of the season?
Well, it's Tango Cash.
That's probably the right answer.
Yeah.
I'd like to.
Oh, fuck you.
You don't know what I'm gonna say.
What is it? What's the one you're gonna say?
I'm
Do you
gonna
want to
say
do it at 3?
Declan's
Do you want to
corrective.
do it on 3?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought you were gonna say your excerpt name.
No.
I thought you were in character as Grand Magnificent, and you were gonna say, I think the best name is the one I came up with.
No, Declan's corrective has 2 K sounds in it. I like how it sounds. The CL, it's just got really good mouthfeel all the way around. Also, I don't know the excerpt name I came up with. I don't even have it written down as like one thing because we were like brainstorming on it. I have to like go to our
fans,
DMs, then like
our DMs,
stitch it together.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't even know that name.
Some
I just know that it has
mountains.
a period in the middle of it. If you're out there and you're tweeting about it, there's a period in the middle. Between Grand and Magnificent, that's a full stop.
Full
I
stop.
thought that was a comma. Okay.
No, not a comma.
No, it's 2 sentences.
It's 2 sentences. It was very important that we did it with 2 sentences. We did have that conversation. It is: peace returned to the valley, the rivers flowed clear and blue, the mountains resplendent, grand. Magnificent light shone on the diligent and the penitent alike. It's a good name. Anyone else have favorite names?
Public
Kitchikana
person.
is a good name. Oh, I'm sorry.
Kitchikana, public person.
Yeah, those are...
Public person. I really wanted public person to be in the show, and it just like never lined up that way. He just like, there's a limit to like, how can I get this information broker into the show outside of making him like really just throwing him into the game in a way that didn't feel honest, and so I just never did. Again, maybe he'll show up in a side game, but he was absolutely supposed to be the Paisley Moon of this season, like 100%, and just never got the. It happens. That's how it goes sometimes.
I liked Figure A.
Right.
Figure A is a name that is like clean enough conceptually. It's just like a very straightforward name.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those names that as soon as you see it, you're like, oh damn, why didn't I think of that? That's great. Why can't we have more Figure A?
I know. One
and
day
then
we'll
I
get like a
also-
Figure B, and that'll be their great. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe we
exactly.
won't, but
There was another one which is I'm looking at a list of NPC names and I saw it and then I lost it. I like Lily Lysander a lot, just because of the alliteration.
a lot of alliteration
Oh.
this year.
I like all the fucking. My favorite running character are the Castle Rise assassins who keep coming back as different 21st century or 20th century musicians. The fact that we could have a character called Charles Mingus, and the fact we could have a character called like the Thin White Duke and stuff like that was
It's
just
very fun.
a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. Let's
We had good family members too. Echo and Ballad are great.
Yes, all of Echo's family. That's all Andy's naming conventions. They're all super good.
Keen Forrester Gloaming and Grey Gloaming.
Yeah, Keen Forrester Gloaming, Grey Gloaming,
Yeah.
Grey spelled with an A and an E interchangeably because I can never commit. Keen Forrester Gloaming is the most fun I've ever had saying words since Territory Jazz. I love saying Keen Forrester Gloaming. Like it just, and a thing I realized very recently is that Chief Intercessor of the Rapid Evening and Primary Observer of the Twilight Mirage is just his excerpt name. It just is. Like, he says it without it meaning anything because it's just a verse to him. It's just like it's just words at some point. And I fucking love. So he's my favorite character.
What are the marks around in his exit name?
I can go two ways. It's either Intercessor, or because this is the season of doubles, it's Mirage. Right?
Yeah.
He is Mirage. He is like, is he there or isn't he there? Like, where is his loyalty at? All of that stuff, I think, is 100%.
Exit of the worst divine ever made.
100%. 100%. Shout out to Brokeback Mountain, which is what his accent comes from, which is like, I just watched Brokeback Mountain and was like, I need to learn this Montanan accent. And it's not exactly that, but that is the 100%. I think it's like Heath Ledger's accent in Brokeback Mountain. Are we ready for the next question?
Shout out to Ang Lee.
Shout outs to Ang Lee.
Shout out to Ang Lee.
This one comes in from Claire. Over the course of the season, many of the player characters hinted at attraction and even romantic feelings towards each other and NPCs. However, by the end of the finale, many of these connections went unaddressed to varying degrees, even during the characters' epilogues. Or are these questions purposefully left unanswered, or do the players have personal feelings about how those relationships might have continued or ended? I'm leaving this to y'all for the most part. That's a laugh from Allie. Yeah. Dre, yeah, you and Cascabel, you and me, we did all right. Like, we on record, so. But yeah, Allie, you were laughing. Is it because you have, like, 3 romantic leads this season, or romantic connections this season? Is that right? Open wins poem, and then I think a lot of people see 1415 as a potential paramour, right?
Yeah. I know there's a lot of Tender 14 fans out there, and I would like to issue a public apology for having the most potent player character ship in the show when the entire point of my character was non-commitment.
Right.
Yeah. That was the whole thing. So I apologize for that. The guiding light that I have for everyone is that you can either read 14 and Tender's final actions as this horrible breakup, or you can read it as this amazing gift of the Magi situation.
Oh my god.
14 is I kept the Mirage so we can live together in the dirt in the Mirage, and then Tender's I gave anticipation away so we can live forever in technology.
It's oh, you sold your watch strap to buy my thing. Oh god.
Yeah, it's miserable.
I don't know. What? On the one hand, what Austin said earlier about you can just do whatever you want with headcanons and things. Just go right ahead. In fact, go right ahead with blessings. But I think for me, 14 was always a character who was interested in cultivating relationships with people that, perhaps because of their condition, but perhaps just because of the person that they were, was about finding a connection with people that wasn't necessarily romantic.
Right.
We have known 14 to be a hell of a flirt, but I think especially in the case of 14, I think that is sometimes independent from wanting to pursue romantic relationships with people. You've talked about this on the show in the past. I think a lot of us have talked about this on the show in the past with Scout Harding.
Right. From Dragon Age Inquisition. Yeah.
And how Scout Harding is this incredible character who has this rapport with people, but also that relationship is a friendship. And it's very important to me, coming from video games where we don't see this relationship very often, and when we do, it's not often told very well. It's very important to me to be able to tell stories about people who are close friends, and the intimacy that is involved in a close friendship that isn't necessarily a romantic relationship. I have friends in my life who I value tremendously and who I love very much, and who I have a degree of personal intimacy with, but that is not a romantic intimacy. And I value those friendships and I value those relationships a great deal. And it's important to me to be able to go some way towards depicting those kind of characters in the stories that we tell.
Who are absent from mainstream media all the time, right?
And then when you see them, you're like, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
Because because like I think it's a relationship that a lot of people have and a lot of people experience it, which means that when we see it on screen or when we see it in the stories that we experience, we're like, this is fucking great. I know someone like this.
And I should note that like this wasn't, we're not having this conversation now and like, wow, I'm glad that worked out. Like we had this talk internally in the same way that Dre and I had the like, oh, we should confirm, like, are we both on the same page with Even and Cascabel? And we said yes, and then we did that. In the same way, the three of us, Jack, Allie, and I talked about the 14 tender relationship. Like, it's not often that we want to make decisions off mic, but there is nothing but value in adding the safety mechanism and the care in discussing romantic entanglements and questions about character relationships, away from the table or out of character, and having those safe conversations about what players want as individuals, and not just, making that decision have to happen on the fly, at the table in the moment, because in the moment, there are situations that can end up pressuring players into making decisions that they don't want to make. And it's so important to make sure that consent and that, openness and conversation around this stuff is part and parcel with the way that play happens at the table. And that's not to say things can't happen on the spur of the moment, right? Like that there can't also be a sort of like love connection happening between two characters, an NPC and a PC, or whatever that ends up happening. But what's important is that at some point you take that step and go like, okay, wait, do we want to show this on screen? To what degree do we want to show it on screen? Is this a thing that we're interested in at all, or is this going a different direction? And like those conversations are so valuable to me as a GM.
All right, I have two things to say in response to that.
Yeah.
One, Andy and I never had a conversation about Echo and Gran. I'm feeling very called out right now.
I didn't know it existed until we sat down to. So like I knew there was a little bit of it early in the season, but then as you pointed out, y'all weren't on a call together ever again until patina or until downtimes, and then like y'all didn't have conversation time there. And then when Andy said the words, "What has Echo done all season long? Save Gran," my whole heart exploded in joy. And I was like, "Oh shit!" And that was the last recording. That was it, right? So,
yeah, we might have come back for the epilogues, and I think
that's true.
I think that's part of it. It's like, I think it's ambiguous because like we never like it's purposely unanswered because one, I always want there to be space for people to do what they want, especially when it's ending.
Yeah,
like I feel like very little satisfaction in bringing some big important plot point 20 minutes before I never deal with these characters again in my life, like especially something like that, like all of these things are for other people now. But that's diverged from my second point that I referenced at the beginning of this of my answer, which is that I'm very mad that Mulder and Scully ended up together on the X-Files, because I thought that was a good, functional, professional relationship ruined by this like clamoring to have these two coworkers have sex with each other.
That's how I feel about Bones.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
Art, you're right, but they did spend like 5 seasons telegraphing it. Like
I don't think they spent the first season telegraphing it.
I watched that first season pretty recently. They fuck in the first season.
Welcome to I Want to Believe, a new podcast from the Front of the Table Network.
Don't joke. I would love that.
Yes.
Anyway, I think I like the X-Files better in a world where that relationship doesn't exist. And yeah, sorry that I wasn't on more arcs with Andy.
Yeah, I have to apologize. I guess I'm sorry too.
There's not an apology.
Yeah.
No.
I want written apology.
Oh my god. Before we move off of Grand Echo, I just want to.
My whole thing is I just kind of wanted to leave all that stuff
vague
because I think it's more fun for people to fill in the gaps. I never looked at what we were doing with like. I never wanted Echo's story to be like I'm fine with romance being an element, but I never wanted it to be a love story. I wanted it to be about someone figuring out how to be their own person.
Right.
And as like I very much wanted it to be about like, yes, characters' relationships interact with that, but I didn't want to be like, and then they kissed this hipster dude at the end of the show and everything was fixed. Like,
Right.
One, I didn't even really think I didn't realize it until around the time everyone else did, and I was like, oh yeah, that does click. But then also I was like, yeah, well,
Totally.
Yeah, and I've seen better ideas in fan works in the last week than I ever would have come up with.
Yeah, that's also. Yeah.
You're all better at this than I am. Just have fun.
Signet or Janine.
There's an elephant in the room here that I think will be addressed in the next question, so I'll leave that. But the thing that I will say here is that I remember at some point, Austin, you made some comment about Signet flirting with Show or something, and I remember I said like, ew, no, like I said something to that effect because specifically because that's like to me a more maternal relationship,
Right, which I had not seen.
And, yeah,
it wasn't Show. It wasn't Show. It was Blueberry Gin.
Right, it was Blueberry Gin. You're right.
Yes.
And that's a thing that also I feel like we don't get into too often in this show, and part of the reason that I wanted to play a in hindsight cartoonishly older character, in a sense, not a physical sense obviously, but I wanted to play like this sort of mom-like figure who still had sort of a romantic aspect to her, like still had physical attraction and stuff like that, because mom characters often don't. But also I wanted to have those kinds of relationships as well, the kinds of just like, right. I just want to help you become a fully realized person, or I just want to see you well situated, right. That kind of thing. And I wanted, if that went well or poorly, to not be a thing tied to romance, but a thing tied to responsibility and parenting and mentorship and that kind of thing.
Right, and whether or not that was a success or not.
Yes.
Versus it being, and I'm using reduced here as shorthand, but it being reduced to or only caught up and only described as a romantic failing or a romantic, relationship gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. All right. Any other thoughts here? I think the last one is probably Gig and Kent, which again we just Gig just as a character, it turned out, was not feeling those feelings in the same way. Enjoyed Kent's company, right? But there wasn't anything else, which also happens.
Right, and then I feel like that one actually was pretty resolved, because I invited Kent to come to the choir, and Kent was like, "No, I just signed all this paperwork with Seneschal's brace." He's like, "Okay, well then bye."
Gotta go. Yeah. Anything else on this before we move on?
I very briefly just want to say that Waltz Tango Cash was the biggest. Oh my god,
I forgot about. How did I forget about that?
It was just the biggest test for me as a person in removing character affection from my own affection. He was such a Malcolm situation.
Every time Waltz, I just want everyone to. I need a supercut of anytime Waltz Tango Cash is on screen with Tender, and you can. If this was an animated show, you might be able to hear Tender purring, just like. I won so many awards.
Specifically, I don't remember what we were talking about this. I think it was just in Discord, but I think I was I think Tender carries around a Waltz Tango Cash DVD and really wanted to sign it, but can't ask him. And that was if a director was telling me, Allie, this is what you're doing in a scene, that was the exact emotion I was chasing every time they were in a room together. Just I watch all your stuff, you're so great, but we're also co-workers.
Hold on. What is it a DVD of? He's a mercenary. He's a bounty hunter.
No one's ever seen the A-Team.
Yeah.
You're okay. That's fair. I have not seen it.
Oh, Waltz.
You should see the A-Team. Just a couple episodes. It's not good, but I think it's an important.
Oh, it's so good. It's so fucking good. All right, I'm gonna move on because otherwise.
Are you talking about the A-Team or the Waltz Tango Cash thing?
The Waltz Tango Cash thing. A-Team's all right. Okay. A-Team's good. I'm moving on. From B, who says, What does marriage look like in the Twilight Mirage? Were there cool traditions that are different on different planets or ships? I imagine yes. I imagine yes for that second part. But I'm curious, Janine, it sounded like you had an answer for this one all queued up in your mind.
Belgard and Signet are definitely in a marriage. I don't want to say they're married because that's like a really specific mental association, but they are in a marriage. Like they are.
Welcome to Friends at the Table, the podcast where they're not married, they're in a marriage is a meaningful distinction. And I mean that. That's not sarcasm.
It is, right? Like they are partners in the sense of like they didn't have, I mean, they definitely didn't have a ceremony other than whatever ceremony there is when you become an excerpt or did become an excerpt way back when in the olden times. They don't like kiss on the mouth or whatever because Belgard doesn't really have one, but they are, they're in a partnership. They are at every opportunity that I had. I tried to describe them in this like comfortable old married couple way of like, they have this thing and it works and they are closer to each other than anyone else in the world. And like, that's not a thing. I'm not dancing around that. That is to me, like they are partners in every sense. And then also just like, Signet has other needs and she goes and pursues those and Belgard is fine with that and like Belgard does shit too and I mean Belgard doesn't like go to brothels but Belgard I'm sure has needs like social needs and whatever that are also fulfilled but like I want to be explicit about that because I think that is part of what marriage can look like. I also don't think that's the case with every excerpt, every divine.
Right, like that's what you said. Like they had the ceremony of Signet becoming Belgard's excerpt, but that is not a marriage ceremony for some other excerpts and divines. Exactly. Some of them are partners in different ways, and some of them historically, and especially in the divine free states now, are not that at all. Right, which is interesting. So awesome. Any other marriage thoughts? A lot of people wanted to know about Gray and Damani's wedding, which I think is just, in my mind, is just the entire brink becomes like the... Picture a truck stop in the sky, but then picture that truck stop is run by like two cool queer ladies and their like punk son, and they just redecorate the whole thing. You know what it is? It looks like the place that Art got married. Which Art, do you want to describe that the location, the venue?
Yeah, it's a big warehousey antique store on Culver City in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
and it's they do a lot of work to make it a wedding venue. It's very crowded.
Like it's just an antique shop. Literally, it's just an antique shop.
All the stuff still had price tags. Some of our guests stole geodes because they thought they were wedding favors.
Are you for real? Why didn't we steal geodes?
Austin, put all your geodes back.
Oh, fuck.
God, that was a good fucking wedding.
Yeah, I snuck into an unauthorized zone, but I didn't steal anything.
Didn't we? We found something really frightening, didn't we, Ali? Or did we? We didn't find
the
clown.
The clown ride?
No. You were worried that we'd see the clown. We saw like a suit of. We saw like a gauntlet, like an iron gauntlet that was mounted to a sort of wall plate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Malguin.
I want to know how bad is it, like, because it's one thing for there to be a scary clown, but it's another thing for the clown to be so scary that someone is worried just that you've seen it.
It was so horrifying. It was there. We went to like the walkthrough the week out to be like, what antiques would you like out for your guests? And that's where I could be like,
the clown.
Yo, put that tuba out. And that clown was so horrifying that we had to like, we talked about it when we saw it, and then at the end we had to go back and be like, this can't be here. And then when we left, I had a separate conversation. We had a separate conversation with the wedding planner. Like, if you get here and anyone can see that clown, it's an emergency.
So I think all of you
please
clown off the floor.
Oh,
I did not see the clown.
I'm sad. I'm sad. I would rather live in the light. Yeah, I am. I would rather live in fear for the rest of my life, having seen that clown, than to not.
What
know.
about if Ali and I had come back and been like, Austin?
We are scarred because we have seen the clown.
It said someone here won't make it out.
God.
I mean, if you're in LA and want to go down to
God.
Big Daddy's Antiques, I bet that's still there. I bet no one bought that $2,000 clown.
Art, you broke up. Did the clown get you? Art?
Oh my god! Oh my god!
Art? Oh my God. I
No,
think
I've been here. I was just trying to do
them.
a bit.
Wait, is this still the bit, or did the clown take your voice?
I think the
Now
clown stole
talking.
Art's. Yeah.
Well, here's where it has to go in the wiki. Here's where no one's ever sure if it's really art.
From now on, it could be
From
the
now
clown.
forward.
I am
You'll
excited
never know.
I'm excited to hear what this clown thinks about the weird utopian sci-fi season that they just embodied the body of the man who did.
Oh, so I think the Grey Damani wedding is like that. There's no clown. They keep the clown away, but it's lots of cool like antiques, and stuff that the truckers have brought through, and stuff that they like. I think that they just pick. I think that the various truckers who come through the brink are like, oh yeah, I found this on this planet, or I picked this up from a little souvenir shop, and it ends up just naturally kind of looking like the cool version of a TGI Fridays in there, where it's genuinely filled with like knickknacks from the worlds. And not just like they hired a decorator to do that. And then like imagine that, but with some like cool flowers. Like I think that there are flowers in the Twilight Mirage that look like dried flowers, but are alive all the time, and can grow, looking like cool dried flowers. See, there's a lot of that.
I think there are flowers in our world that are like that.
Okay, sure, I believe that. They're also in the Twilight Mirage because it's cool. And I think everybody comes and it's a nice time. And but I suspect it's weird because it's not. That is not a Divine Fleet wedding. I think that they're in the unique and important position of like needing to invent their own wedding traditions because they've left the Principality of Kesh behind, right? And they're not quite. They're part of the Twilight Mirage, but they're not part of Seneschal's Brace or the DFS or the Quaer Coalition. And so they're in that unique and important place of like, let's invent stuff that we want to do at every wedding and every like personal milestone. Again, fill in the gaps there. Otherwise, I'll just write a fanfic for my own show in here. Any other wedding thoughts? Cool traditions. Here's one because we already set it up a little bit. Even Dre, you set up that like families are not. It's not just like two parents. Is there something like a marriage in the in the Ever Forward, or is it something else?
Yeah, probably. Because I mean, I think that like there probably are people in the Ever Forward who opt for a like what we would think of as a traditional like monogamous relationship.
Right.
And there's probably just as many, if not more, people who have various forms of polyamorous relationships or open relationships or as far as like traditions or like ceremonies and things like that, I would imagine that maybe there probably isn't as much as like a formal. I'm thinking in like Western culture, the differentiation between like the ceremony and the reception.
Sure.
The Ever Forward does not have a ceremony, but it definitely has a reception.
Huh, that's interesting. I like that a lot. Is that let that inform your thoughts in the future. All right, I'm gonna move on. Speaking of utopias and the practices that build them, and religion and tradition and ritual, this one comes in from Riley, who says it was an interesting choice to make the main utopia of this season a theocracy. What were some of your goals and concerns going into that, and how do you feel about how that aspect of the fleet and other religious and pseudo-religious groups turned out in play? Thoughts here, because I think a couple of people, I think both Signet and Tender both obviously are people who have a deep connection to the church and have spoken about everything ranging from Catholicism to a number of other religious traditions. But I'm curious if anybody at the table has more thoughts on this.
So I think I was really clear, like from the get-go, pretty much, like from character creation. And also in a lot of the like Q&A streams we've done since we started Twilight Mirage, that I wanted Signet to be a character that supported the idea that faith could be a beneficial thing in a person's life and not just a sign that they were like ignorant or gullible or whatever, because I think that's the message you often get especially in a lot of like nerd focused media is a terrible phrase. What the heck?
I know
You know
mean.
what I mean.
Yeah.
Big
And
nerd.
yes, that
On the
character
Joe Rogan
choice.
experience.
Oh my god.
Postmortem, everybody. We're done here.
That character choice was a choice I was making for a character, and that wasn't like me thinking, oh, this Utopia season should be about a theocracy. But I think it got to a good place where it sort of, with Signet, the way things go for her, I think underscores the idea that an idea that I agree with, which is that like if you rely on faith being institutionalized, it's gonna be broken and it's gonna fuck shit up, versus if your faith is a personal thing that you can weigh against what's happening in the world around you, instead of just making blanket choices based on how you think things should work or how things used to work or whatever. That's how you get more actual benefit, more actual positivity out of it. I think we got there with that, but it's a little hard to say.
I think it got fractured in a real way, right? Like, I think that, which is intentional, right?
Yes, it should.
You know, I wasn't throwing the word schism around without thinking about what it would connotate, right? Like, faiths change and break over time, and we hit a spot at which, as I say in the kind of faction part of the finale outro, we started with one divine fleet and we kind of ended with four, and we ended with completely different interpretations of faith, or of that specific faith, on top of other ideas around faith from churches that we didn't see or we only saw echoes of, to churches that we never saw on screen at all, but you know, knew the name of or whatever. And it was, you know, I think that it's easy to look at the show and think of past seasons and see it as being a show that is deeply anti-faith and anti-religion. There is a lot of skepticism around God and around power and around the idea that the universe is created in a way that cares about us, right? Like, in the broadest sense, you look at something like Chiron, and in Chiron, it is simply true that the universe doesn't care about us, and the people who were in positions to protect us and save us and who we worshipped have failed to do that. And that is not a thing I regret in any way, but I was interested in telling a story that started at a different place and then explored honestly from there how faith could fit into the lives of people, and how it could unify some people and how it could help people find definition for themselves. Playing Show was so rewarding, because she was someone who was deeply honest in her faith, who had to confront the failures of the church, and then who had to step forward still strong in her belief in the place of faith in her life, in the place of a church in her life, the place of an organized religion in her life, but had to say, okay, well, how do I deal with the fact that there are people in this organization, in the organizational side of my faith, that have failed me? And it was really a joy to be able to check back in with her in the second half of the show, to show how she had grown and changed. So that's for me, like, definitely the kind of through line. Tender, as someone who in the last episode said that you were a candidate who chose an excerpt name because you'd read the Bible, you want to speak to this a little bit?
A little bit. So the foundation of Tender originally was like to have a character that had a very close relationship to their faith, but had a broken relationship with like the structure of that faith, the church essentially. And like when I initially had like conceived of Tender, that was like a further relationship. So like I think I struggled a little bit finding the footing of like how to best show this, but like she's also working as an agent for essentially the Divine Fleet.
Right.
And like there's a range of the sort of things that she chases, and like the way that relationship becomes really unhealthy, and like is also chasing the thing that's going to make her happy. And I think that's like what I said before with her, like not being able to commit to anything. Once you put like the thing that she loves on the table, it's just like, okay, well, this is the thing that she's going to try to make work. Whereas like all other opportunities, she's either like kind of pushed people away or like kind of been like, I feel warmly towards you, but I'm still gonna treat this with distance, things like that. And I just tried to kind of have that echo throughout. And I think that's how interesting the like Signet, Tender, Cadent, Divine kind of was, because there were a lot of characters who had like been damaged by the way that the fleet was declining.
Right.
And the responses to that in terms of like, Signet and Show like rejecting the Cadent in a big way and being like, I don't want to speak for either of you, but in being like, you were useless then, you're
Right.
not really being as progressive as you could be now. What are you really doing? And Tender being like, well, yeah, she spent years in this position and no one listened to her, and like she is capable of doing this. Just let her do it. Let her grow as a person. And I think that like her initially being like, I don't want to recreate the fleet with the Awakened Cadent because I don't agree with this, but I also have this love for what this faith is, ended up being a ending that I was satisfied with. So I was glad that we kind of got there and got to see all of these different like versions of it.
This reminds me that the other choice that I loved was the end of the heist game, game from Follow, in which the end of it where Jack is playing the Cadent under Mirage, and Tender's playing Tender, and Allie's playing Tender, and Jack makes the decision as the Cadent to defer to Tender with what to do with Robin's song and with Open Metal, and kind of says like, who basically says, I'm basically a figurehead. Like, you are my right hand. I will trust in you. I have faith in you. And then Tender makes that decision to be like, all right, well, fucking kill this guy. Is this moment of like, that reshapes the rest of that season for me, right? Like, I had been playing the Cadent as someone who was naive, but I didn't want her to seem incapable. And what Jack made me realize was that not being capable does not have to look like, being foolish or not knowledgeable or not having the potential to do things well. It can just look like indecision or a refusal to be the one to make the decision. And so we ended up getting the whole arc of the Cadent under Mirage over the rest of the show, in which she becomes someone who wants to make decisions. But also it let me then decide that, like, we'll get into this again in the next question, I think, but one of the core questions for the season has been, if you are a utopia, if you have shit, if you have stuff, if you are in a position of power, do you have a responsibility to give that power to other people and to spread as far as you can? Or does that run the risk of becoming imperialism, right? Does that run the risk of you over showing your hand, of pushing into other people's lives? And obviously there are ways to succeed at that while, without falling into imperialism. But fundamentally, it's easy to live a perfect life on a mountain. It becomes immeasurably harder to do that once you move into the world, right? Once you're dealing with other people in a day-to-day life, it becomes way harder not to hurt someone in your attempts to help people generally. And for the whole first half of the season, the faith of the Resonant Orbit, as represented by the Cadent under Mirage, is content with living on a mountain. And because of the events of the mid-season, the holiday special, and then with what follows, with Tender's guidance, decides, no, there is a responsibility. And that ends up being the core of the debate that she has with Signet at the Feast of Patina, where whether she means to or not, she ends up echoing a lot of Kamala Cadence's points around the responsibility of divines to serve people. And I think she does so in a way that is like convincing to some degree for the listener, but not for Signet, who has abdicated that entire aspect of the faith because it's built on, again, it's a poison tree, right? Like, it is what will lead to another independent situation, and Signet sees that, but the Cadent under Mirage can't. And so I just really wanted to emphasize that degree of nuance in which people can be acting in their faith from the best intentions and can even be helping people, but also the second you're applying any sort of belief system in the world, it's going to get messier. And I think the Caden under Mirage ended up being someone who was really useful for bringing that out in terms of the consequences. Any other thoughts about faith here? Because despite it being a major religious fleet, like most other characters did not have a direct relationship to the divine in that way.
I think even for me was, especially like kind of towards the end, was the kind of story of a person who started off, I mean, like literally serving, like in a military sense, but that service for him came from, a belief that the values and the things that came from the Everforward and the fleet writ large were like worth serving and worth protecting,
Mm-hmm.
and then becoming really kind of disillusioned with that. But I think at the end, swinging back around and realizing that, like, even as something that you no longer believe in or you don't value the same way, there's probably still like there are like personal values and morals like worth holding on to. I don't know.
Right. Riley in the chat, I just saw this. I was not looking at that chat. I was looking at notes and stuff. Wanted to clarify that there's the kind of one of the key parts of this question is like, oh, the utopia is a theocracy, and that theocracies historically have not necessarily been the most safe or just societies, right? And I think that's entirely part of what we wanted to challenge ourselves with, right? Was like, we've spent lots of seasons talking about faith and societies built around faith as being dystopic, right? And dystopian and being corrupt. And the part of the challenge, and this is all the way through the entirety of how we rendered utopia, was, can we find a way in which to think about a society built around a common faith that was also grounded in a materialism in a way that human faiths have not been historically. That is not I wanted to separate the idea that I wanted to see if we could separate the idea that faith and that organized religion, things that I have left behind as a person, could still be a center for organizing for good. And maybe that doesn't function here. Like maybe that doesn't tangle with it enough, but that was the thinking behind it, at least. I don't know if the other players have thoughts there too.
I have a little one in that I feel like this is part of what Tender's arc is too, where
Right.
it's like, especially after the miracle, where she's like, okay, I believe my faith is good. I believe that people need help. I've seen other societies now and seen how, like, even the societies that I think have hurt me have hurt the people within it. And being like, okay, what I'm going to do is walk the earth and help everybody that I can, and that's my job, and it's going to work. And, like, that's definitely her with, like, those kids. And then you get to the end of the show where it's like, okay, those were all good intentions. Somebody told me to fuck off at Christmas, and I'm going to have to take that into account. Because, like, the thing that, like, Tender definitely believed, hey, we should all make this work if we all have the best intentions, and we should push out bad actors. And then being like, okay, in what way am I also a bad actor here? And, like, in what way are things more valuable to the people here than they are for me?
Right. I'll say the thing that just hit me is a thing I actually said earlier tonight, which is, the big villain leaving this season is a theocracy that has totally twisted what was once good intentions into something deeply harmful in the divine principality. And the thing that I want to underscore there is what I think is revealed is that the belief system was not enough for that theocracy to not be harmful to people. What made the Divine Fleet function was an investment, a material investment in people and services that ensured that those on the margins were moved from the margins and their needs were addressed, and that they were not oppressed and not systemically dehumanized and kind of left to be on the sides where their needs were not met. And so it's like one of the reasons why I'm so happy we started in Contrition's figure in the space game was because I immediately wanted to focus on, as society is falling apart, as this theocracy begins to struggle or reaches maybe the height of its struggle, who suffers? And the answer is going to be the people on the margins. And there was a limited amount of canvas space to work with there, right? Because we'd established that things like self-determination were still effective in the fleet, right? People were, their identities as individuals had not been threatened. But I know that as societies begin to crumble, there are people on the margins who get stuck under boots. And in this case, it became clear to me that someone in the carceral system, people in the carceral system in general, was a place where a theocracy that was falling apart would quickly fail to meet the needs that it once was. And the utopia would begin to crumble there. And so, for me, the reason that the Divine Fleet becomes the DFS, becomes the Divine Principality, is that it fails to continue to invest in the infrastructure, right? We started the season, or I kind of teased the season once with a picture of a building under construction. The intro talks about divines as being like buildings, like cathedrals, like, highways. Divines are, in some ways in this season, a stand-in for public services. And so what the revelation is that the theocracy, in the end, the divine free states, are more interested in the beliefs and the ways in which those belief systems and the dogmas and the structures of how people are supposed to worship, the definition of what a divine is, becomes a weapon to keep the status quo, to keep those who are in hierarchical positions of power in power. And they can't do that without the faith, right? That ends up being the thing that they utilize to push the rest of the divine free states towards the eventual imperial identity that it takes. It starts with what counts as a divine. It doesn't start with who's feeding you. It starts with what counts as a divine and how are these other faiths a perversion of that belief. And it ends with, and now we're going to switch these things from being that were once guardians of justice and guardians of individuals and of the culture at large into things that enforce, kind of biopolitically, enforce a way of life. Which we will get into at some point in the future as we one day return to this universe. I hope that that's a better answer. I had to just think about it for a second and actually get the heart of what I wanted to say there.
Can I give like a cop-outy addendum here?
Always.
Which is that, like, the specific clarification calls out, being a Jewish person and seeing that kind of thing. And as a Jewish person, I would like to say that I spent this season kind of just dodging the question. Grand Magnificent never had to have an opinion on that, which was a little bit by design. I sort of wanted, after Winter, I sort of wanted to be a little less tied into the foundation of the plot. Right. I wanted to be a little higher up. I wanted to be a mid to higher level actor. Yeah, it didn't go well. I'm in the present with you all too. Right. But that's it. It's Hadrian is my character for dealing with how I feel about being in a religious minority, and Grand Magnificent is my character for talking about all the cool ways you could put neon on clothing.
And then that ended up becoming more challenging because it ended up being literally about well, all right, but also your starting belief was I want to build God a new body. So
yeah, but
sometimes we dig our own graves.
Everything.
Yeah.
That's not to glorify God. That's to glorify Him.
Oh, yeah. Right. You're right. That's true. Briefly, I want to define a thing I said, because sometimes I say words that I don't define. Biopolitics is a term that Foucault uses to discuss a change in the way power functions. It's a mode of power that the powerful can operate in. Previously, there was a time at which the people who ran the world had sovereign power, had power over life and death, who lived and who died. If you were powerful, you were allowed to say, I'm going to kill this person. That's what power was about. It was about killing someone or starving someone or whatever, and being able to get away with that. Not only get away with it, but be told, yes, that is just. That is just that you killed that person because you are the king, and divinely you are the sovereign of this place, and you decide who lives and dies. Biopower, kind of biopolitical theory is all about the ways in which contemporary leaders, how sovereign powers now are less interested in who lives and who dies. They obviously still also do that, but they're more interested. The thing that develops is their ability to determine how we live. Not if we live, but how we live. What determines who you can sleep with and still be considered a good person. It determines what sorts of foods you're allowed to eat and drink, how long you're allowed to be out in public, what you're allowed to wear when you're out in public. Obviously, Foucault is very interested in sexuality and gender and the presentation of sexuality, and so there's a lot of stuff there. But it's as much about what music is considered pretty versus what music is considered ugly as it is about who you sleep with. And so it's all about kind of the ways in which those in power can discipline us until we act like capital G, capital C, good citizens. And I see the Divine Free States and the Divine Principality, and the Rapid Evening especially, right? The Rapid Evening, who have literally... The Principality of Kesh is as close to the Panopticon as I can get to without saying the fucking words. Like, the people in the cells of the Panopticon perform discipline on themselves. They don't need guards to come say, don't do that. They discipline themselves because they know they are being watched. And so the people on Cycle are doing that. They're deciding to live in the roles that society needs in order to continuously reproduce itself. And we'll get more into that again at some point deep in the future. I hope that is to some degree fulfilling as an answer. Next question. This one comes in from Nora. What were your biggest influences in creating a utopia? Were there certain things that you set out to do with the utopias in Twilight Mirage that you felt like other utopian fiction or political philosophy missed, or things you'd seen elsewhere that you wanted to be sure were included? Any thoughts here? I just talked a lot, so I'm trying not to talk again.
That's okay. I guess I feel like Gig worked really hard to try to make the Choir Planets good places to be. And a lot of that involved cooperation and working together and having fun to get communities.
Right.
And I feel like I spend a lot of time thinking about and reading about versions of a future that are dependent on communities. And so a lot of it was almost an exercise for myself to think about more interdeterminate self-determination instead of very dependent self-determination.
Can you
Does that make sense?
Can you define what you mean by interdeterminate?
Yeah,
a little bit.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the idea that communities are literally important versus maybe existing but unimportant, or that you can do something without one.
Right, or important only insofar as they allow for something like trade, right? Which is one of the ways that we talk about communities in America is that I say this including the way that I think a lot of creators talk about fan communities, the way in which we talk about minority communities in America is, think about how often you've heard the phrase that oh, the black community has a lot of, maybe you even heard this, but this is the thing I've heard as being in the fucking business world is oh, the rise of middle-class black Americans mean that they have lots of buying power now, right? Mm-hmm. Think about the construction of identities, including, queer identities that are kind of fenced in until they are made to be productive inside of the system as it stands today, and the ways in which the goal is to create a community that either doesn't have to be dealt with, so that it doesn't put anything under risk, or it works to be another column to hold up things as they already are. And I think Gig did a lot of work to be no. Communities are in and of themselves valuable things.
Yeah. And so, what you're saying, that is that's, I think the idea of monolith communities that are not even people, like a business world or a political world, treat communities as like they are identity based, not geography based,
Yes.
which is already like a misnomer. Like that's not what a community is really.
Yeah.
But then there's all like the internet changes that in ways where now you can have virtual geography for a community, but I was talking about specifically just going back like from the other side where it's like communities, not only are those communities not valuable, but no communities are valuable. And I read a lot about stuff that takes that as a position. And a lot of it's really compelling stuff, but
Right.
I think that like Gig's ideas and stuff that he wanted to do was a direct challenge to the like stuff that I'm surrounded by
Constantly
by choice politically.
Yeah.
Like in my own time, where I'm like, well, a lot of this stuff is really compelling, but also like communities are literally valuable.
Right. Or I think we ended up having a bit of this because I part of the NPC faction outro was about the group of kind of counselor class people in the Quiet Air Coalition stepping away, right, and dissolving the state effectively.
Yeah,
I think you and I come at this from different perspectives. Like I don't want to get too deep into our personal political philosophies here, right? But like I'm absolutely a communist and a socialist, and I suspect that you lean anarchist at this point, right?
Yeah.
And I think that like a thing I love is a lot of the challenges, and I could sense that in Gig from the jump, right? Like Gig's whole vibe of like DIY self-sufficiency is such a positive vision of what kind of anarchism can look like as an individual trying to help communities and help people self-sustain, right?
Yeah.
Help you self-sustain without reliance on a state that can take advantage of you. And one of the things I loved giving Gig as a character all season were opportunities to interact with people who could not self-sustain, regardless of whether or not they knew how to build an ice skating rink, or who could self-sustain but at a cost or under threat. And what Gig made very clear was like, oh, actually, those groups do need protection, or those groups need to be more self-sufficient than they are right now. Or like, it was just fun to see Gig figure that stuff out.
Yeah, sure. This season in general is very strange because of how long it was. That like
yes.
I have had dramatic changes in how I feel about the world just since we started the season, and so about when it started mattering, I started having a firmer grasp on like what I wanted Gig to do, and specifically that was like to kind of be a guy with like good instincts but no theory,
right?
Yes, like that could sort of stumble into the right thing or stumble into the wrong thing. And leading into the downtime, we had discussion where I had decided that Gig was going to stumble into the wrong thing, and continue to be part of Seneschal's Brace.
Yeah.
And
there's the patina downtime you're talking about, right?
Yes, yeah. And then the Iota Pretense eruption that only happened because of Signet instigating everybody. I was just like, no, that's good. That's compelling. That is a compelling enough argument. That's like the first bit of sense anyone's been talking. I guess that's what I'm doing.
Which felt right? Because like that felt like the good
did.
intentions found theory or found
you found an argument that like there wasn't anyone making an argument really,
right?
Or the only people that were like the Seneschal's Brace people.
Totally.
Like they were the only ones actually trying to make convince anyone of anything. And then I took one other person and it was just like a split decision for me to make that split decision for Gig.
Right.
I don't remember what that was about, that last bit, but yeah, it made sense.
Yeah, it made sense. Anyone else have thoughts here?
I think there's the elephant in the room, which is like the idea of redemption, which I think that we've had a gradient of over the season.
Over the series, or the show,
yeah.
Right? Even.
Yeah. And I think that like, I mean, specifically for Tender, who had a like probably had the warmest relationship with Declan's Corrective out of the cast. In terms of just being like, I mean, the thing with Tender was that she did not have traditional means to, like, prison, essentially. That's not the word that I should be using, but she never had the opportunity to go to Contrition's Figure. Like,
Right.
she is guilty for the crime that she committed, but, like, that is a thing that she struggles with personally. And then she has to act in the world as someone who acts with confidence. And then, like, in terms of her just being able to look at this person and be like, oh, you have access to the thing that I really want.
Yeah.
And also, I believe in the structure of the society that I lived in. So I played it straight the entire time, where it's like, okay, you did the thing.
Right.
And like there's obvious moments of suspicion there. That's like why she sticks around with him. But it's also just like her commitment to believing that worked was part of her relationship with him.
Right.
Obviously.
There was an episode that I was not on of Waypoint Radio. If you have more, you should do your more, and I'll wait and save mine.
You go on, and then we'll see.
Okay. There was an episode recently of Waypoint Radio that I was not on, in which the topic of redeemed villains was the focus. It was a really great episode. It was Natalie and Danielle and Patrick and Rob over at Waypoint, and one of the great differentiations that comes up there that spoke to me, and especially for this character, was the difference between redemption and rehabilitation. There are people on that podcast who have dealt with
what I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay. People on the podcast who have dealt with abuse and abusers, and who were glad that the people in their lives have found rehabilitation, and it's separate from the sort of redemption arcs that are often presented to us in video games and in movies and stories, because the redemption arc often tries to erase or reconfigure the actions of abuse or violence in ways that erase the pain or make it worth it in the end or something. And also spend screen time on the abuser, right? Like the example that podcast goes into really well is the Bloody Baron from The Witcher 3, a character who is an abuser and who gets a lot of screen time and who is more important to his story than any of the people he hurt. And there's a great conversation about it. And I bring this up because this just came out fairly recently, and it was a really fascinating thing to think about in the wake of Declan's Corrective. I think we'd done the season by the time this episode even came out in terms of recording, so it wasn't like an influence on the finale so much as it was just an interesting listen about this topic. But one of the things that reminded me was that I never really spoken to y'all on the show about my influence for Declan's Corrective, which is two things. One was, this whole season has had a lot of rehabilitation. Signet did go to Contrition's Figure. Tender did not, but was a criminal, right? Was arrested for terrorism, effectively. Echo was a criminal who I think everyone agreed from the jump was unfairly, maybe not unfairly, but was being treated with a severity that was not due them. So there was a great deal of characters who I did want, and 1415, for instance, is a character who ends up having a rehabilitation arc that is not without having seen the sin to begin with. So I really wanted there to be in this season, once I knew who the characters were, a range of different types of focus on different types of bad actors. And the thing with Contrition's Figure that's so weird for us in 2018 is that no one in society sees the rehabilitation. We talk about faith, and it is like literally on faith that the people who go in, whose crimes you do not know, in society, go in, receive treatment, and return once they are ready to be in society again. And that is such a hard thing to comprehend, or it was such a hard thing for me to comprehend for a long time, until I started thinking about my father, who was someone who was physically and emotionally abusive, someone who comes from the cycle of abuse, someone who was tied to a tree and beaten by his father as a kid. And someone who, like, if there is, Declan's Corrective is a poet, my father is a musician, my mom is a poet, so it's definitely the most of my parents there. I lived in fear of my father for all of my childhood, just deeply. And at some point he got better, and partially from therapy, I think, but I never met his therapist. Partially because of the effect that his partner, his wife had on him, I think. Partly because he came to terms with the relationship he had with his own father, maybe, but I don't know. And the pain that my father caused me is deeply still there. I still, my understanding of my own masculinity will always be shot through by the names he called me when I was a child, right? I will never get over the things that he did to my mother. And also, he is not that person at this point in his life. And that is a very hard thing to contend with. And so there are shadows of that in Corrective for me. There are poems of his that gesture towards abuse and gesture towards selfishness, and he is he's a person who wants to intimidate you, or at least worked on intimidation. And also, he's someone who I think wants to do good in the world and has genuinely changed. And it would have been so easy for me to dedicate screen time to making people like this fucking guy. Like, we had Ibex, we've had Arel, right? Like, we have Samat. We have people who've done truly terrible things on the screen. And I've wanted to give them, and even in this season, people like Indela Apajica, people like Volition, right? Where like, I want to zoom in on that stuff. But here was an experiment, and I don't know that it works, but it was an experiment on whether or not I could capture that specific relationship of this person has done terrible fucking things, and now they are changed. And I believe in change, and I believe in rehabilitation in the same way that I believe in that my mom was right to get the fuck away, right? And like, we spent time in shelters and stuff. Like I it's important to be safe and to, ensure your own independence and the safety of those you love from abusive sources. But in a season that's about utopias, and in a world in which, for me, black and brown people are the ones who are incarcerated in my country, and who leave those places where they have not been given the resources to improve themselves, where they have not been given the resources to re-enter society and find a positive life, to imagine a world in which not only are the resources there, but there are in the world, there has been, through the construction of institutions like Contrition's Figure, a shift in the way people think about rehabilitation. That people who did stupid things when they were 20, that Morning's Observation could become a better person. And Morning's Observation, thankfully, did not go through that system at all for his fucking ass, but like, could have been that person, right? And I wanted to, if we're going to imagine a world in which we can have utopian thinking, which is to say thinking that is incomprehensible to us because we do not live in that utopia, to push myself to try to show it here. And again, I don't know that it works 100%, but I'm happy that we gave it the experiment instead of just being like, I'm so much happier with what happens with him than if I had dedicated a scene every downtime, or 5 more poems or something to slowly woo people over to his perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so sad now that we don't get to see Declan's Corrective get to the point where they're posting just in all caps on Twitter.
My father does his very best, all right? Yeah, and he's a big, it's a wild thing. Like, time does not heal all wounds. Like, hard work and dedication and often a difficult commitment to personal change do. And I'm happy my father has done that. And furious that so many have not. Any other big utopian? I mean, I think that also speaks to one other big thing that was us for this season was process. I had a really productive talk with KB, Jack's partner, earlier in the season, in which we talked about, utopias as static versus utopias as living. And that for us, the thing I wanted to get across was utopias that will survive and that will succeed and that we should believe in, and the ones that we should think about and desire should be utopias of process, not utopias of stasis. And I think that ends up reflecting in what we frame as positive at the end of the season. I'm terrified of the splice. I am not a fan of the splice. I don't want to be in the splice. I immediately think that in our world today, the splice would reinscribe a lot of power structures that already exist, and that whatever freedom it offers us at first would quickly become caught up in the same old bullshit. And I say that because I'm on the internet all the time. I know what that's like. But also, I wanted to represent the freedom that the notion of the splice offered, and that I knew resonated with people, because I know how people had responded to Arel in Hyron without getting into too much detail. And I wanted the version of that was like all about the joy of collaboration and of working together and having infinite space and having a place where you can imagine yourself as anything and to be that thing. That resonates for a reason. That's not bullshit. And part of why I'm happy to frame the end of that thing with such a positive step is that the last thing that happens from a character regarding the splice, the two last things. One, 1415 assures that it cannot come at the cost of reinscribing the marginalization of the people in the Quaer system through that debate. And two, Tender decides to be the thing the internet does not have and be a process of in which people are made safe. And I don't know what that looks like. And I'll say that, like, if we had another 6 episodes, I would absolutely be complicating what Tender Sky internet cop is like, because there are ways that goes bad. But because it was about process and not about stasis, it ended up becoming framed in a positive way, because that was like my keystone for this season, was investing in ongoing processes is the way, processes that self-regulate and that address their own issues is the way in which I want to frame utopian thinking as positive, if that makes sense. But also a cop, definitely a fucking cop. And then in terms of just like broadly references, like Ursula K. Le Guin, Olivia Butler, like all the people wrote in were like, oh, was this a Le Guin thing? Was this a, like, yes, 100%. There are lots of bad utopias in fiction, and the ones that I'm interested in for this season were ones that were like coming from people who understood what marginalization already looked like and then imagined complicated utopias from there. So, any other big picture utopian thoughts here?
I think it's worth saying at some point in the post-mortem that, and I think this is showed through, this has been a really difficult season to make.
Yeah.
And I do not resent that difficulty, but that difficulty, beyond any work, speaking for myself, beyond any work that we've done in the past, this has felt like the one that on every axis we have had to just, like, shoulder to the wheel.
Yeah.
With varying levels of success. Sometimes you push the wheel and it doesn't go anywhere at all, and sometimes you push it and it goes 20 feet and you're like, whoa, what? But I think that it's been very exciting to witness a utopia in motion and to be involved in a utopia in motion. I think a lot of my early missteps early in the season were hearing we're working on a utopia in motion, but not really internalizing how that should function. And I think something that became clear to me, and I got more and more excited by as the season went on, kind of culminating in Futura 3, which was sort of the perfect system of it, was like, have these discussions, talk about this stuff. We talk broadly about goals, but we really don't say, like, all right, we're going to do X, we're going to do Y, and we want to make sure we, always hit this or whatever. Like, I would join Discord calls for sessions going like, I don't know how I feel about this.
Right.
And that's an extremely vulnerable position to put yourself in, and to expect the people around you to be in while making a show, especially like this, where we fucking improvise everything for a year.
Which is easy to forget, I think, sometimes, even on this side of it.
And right, no, totally. Everything we've ever said has been improvised, except stuff you've read.
Right.
And like, but that was deeply exciting, and I think also as a sort of contribution towards creating a text. It was a thematically accurate way of describing something like this. We didn't come to this with a design document. We came to it with a lot of pictures of Catholic art.
Right, and like some Dostoevsky clips, and all right.
Let's go.
I'm gonna move on to the next question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think this is one of my favorite questions here. This one comes from Andrew, who says, the way violence was handled this season was really interesting and felt in line with the portrayal of a utopian vision for the world. Could you talk a bit about violence in role-playing games and how you feel it can and should or should not be used? I'll say that last part I want to leave pretty open, in that, like, I said this at the Waypoint radio panel at PAX last weekend, but, like, I'm not anyone's priest. I can't be. I can't say when something ought not be used in like the life of an adult. Like, if you and your friends are having like a really goofy time doing John Woo style gunfights in games that are deeply uncritical, but you as a person live a deeply critical life and a deeply thoughtful life, and everyone is going into it with like the same understanding of the way violence is going to be portrayed, like I can't be the person who is like, no, you're sinning. It's just not who I am. But I can talk to what we intended. But I'm actually a little bit more interested to talk to hear what people, especially I'd say Dre 14, just everybody. But I want to start with Dre, because Dre, violence became a kind of cornerstone for Even in the last half of the season. And you always were willing to frame it as a negative thing. Was that intentional, or was that like something you were trying to explore there?
I mean, yeah, I think this definitely, the way that I approached like violence in RPGs, I think was really changed, like, although going back to like Marielda and playing Siege and like us having conversations where like I would talk to you off mic and be like, man, playing the violent aspects of Siege is like uncomfortable and hard. But that's like the character that I had made. And I think like that fed into then like Even in, towards the end of the season, that was where I felt his path had taken him.
Right.
And it was like the scene specifically, like where where we're in the hangar and there's like the 3 like torch units or whatever. Yeah. And Even uses the gun.
Or they're angler units with people on them.
With people. No, they're not torch units. They're people. Like,
not that some torch units aren't people. Some of them were. Yam is definitely a person. But those ones, anyway.
I think one of my regrets from this season is I'm worried that I played that scene like really like, oh yeah, no, I shoot them. Like in...
Oh no, that scene was so scary. That whole sequence was scary, but that moment of like, oh no, I'm gonna get. There's a reason I didn't make you roll for it. It was like, no, you're okay. Fuck, okay, here we go.
Yeah, because like, I think Jack, kind of mentioned earlier that like cognitive dissonance of like me as a person, like either loves this or hates this and is in direct opposition to my character. Like me as a person, like felt sick to my stomach playing out that scene.
Yeah.
Because it was gross. It's like that is not the values that me as a person like has, and the actions that me as a person I would take. And yet I hope that came through, but
totally. But like the thing that's interesting to me is it comes from a very positive place in some sense, which is, or it comes from overcorrection, maybe.
Yeah.
What is scary about the scene is the coldness with which Even does it. Even isn't acting because his friends are in danger. He isn't acting with speed because it's necessary in the moment. He's acting because he's obsessed with something he should be maybe a little obsessed with, which is his hand in creating the Advent group, in bringing together Advent, the Volunteers of Seish, the Concrete Town Particulars, and OCOM, right? Like, we started the second half of the season with inaction, or with compromise in place of action, in a way that, there's a question I didn't include in here, but like, what was the hardest decision for me, or what was the thing that kept me up at night, was how to wrap that first arc. Because I wanted to make sure that there was the first arc after the break, the arc on Gift 3 with Signet, Even, and Echo. because I wanted to lean into player agency, and the players had decided to go this route that I expected that whole game to be like, and then we crash in the front gate and beat the shit out of Advent and secure this like portal NBD, and it turns out to be this much more important thing about the way the players, and like Signet, I think this is you especially, being like, no, this place isn't a place where we kick down the fucking door and kill everybody. And the complications that come from wanting compromise, and so much of the second half of the season ends up being about that, and about where is the line between compromise and a sort, how are the ways in which compromise, which is often useful, can also be a tool of oppression by way of indifference, or by way of not thinking about who is going to be affected by that stuff. Does that make sense?
Sometimes you need to shoot first.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that was the big thing, was that what happened there was Signet was coming from a position where, I don't know that this is 100% consistent, but I think for the most part, Signet is not a shoot first in any situation. It's very much like a move has already been made, and if you are attacking, it's because you are stopping something
Right.
that's in play. It's not like, and you know, in this case where everyone is just kind of doing their thing, but you need something different to happen, to her that's not a situation, or at least at the time, is not a situation where you shoot first.
Right.
Because, you know, that's her background. She's coming from a place where people get along and talk to each other mostly, and like, you disagree, but you don't pull out your weapon, you go through channels, you get someone a cake or whatever. Like,
Yeah. Yep. Uh-huh.
so, but sometimes you do need to fucking shoot first. Sometimes you do just need to kick the door in because someone is fucked up and should not be there or whatever. Like,
Yeah. Sometimes hurting people doesn't have to look like that direct. Like, they were literally keeping families apart actively because they were. A thing that I think maybe never became hyper clear is that research project that they're doing at the time is literally part of the research project. This is stuff you would have found if you'd gone into that facility more or whatever, that becomes them chasing the Wandering Sea. That's what they're like. That's why it goes through the water, and that's what they're doing on the other side of the portal, and blah, blah, blah. All of that is about them trying to get the Wandering Sea to try to build their own weird, like, ocean divine, and using like the tech on Gift 3 and the stuff from the energy from the storm mixed with the Wandering Sea, which ends up all coming together in a really cool way at the end, in a way that's like even clearer than it was at the moment, maybe. I guess the last person that I really want to hear from here is 1415, who, on one hand, is an assassin. There are lots of moments of violence from 1415, including probably the most flippant death in the series, which comes from our Follow game, where Mother's Story gets killed. Which I have mixed feelings about as a storyteller, actually, because it felt like it maybe when it... I love that sequence in the Coen brothers, or the oh my god, what is the writer-director's name? I'm forgetting. Shane Blackway, right? Of just like, boom, snap, it happens. It's aestheticized in a way that's really compelling and really like scratches my brain in a good way. But also in the middle of the show 14 arc, and given the rest of our decisions for the rest of the season around violence, I still don't, it doesn't quite sit right with me, because it feels like we were aestheticizing a moment, and the beauty of the violence. Also, fuck Mother's Story. So it's kind of like...
Right. It's like... Yeah, I go backwards and forwards on it, in that I think... It cuts to the, like, telling stories is weird and complicated in the same way that programming is, where, like, you change one thing and you're like, oh, no, wait, that means I'd also have to change that thing back there. Like, I was thinking to myself, I was like, well, I like that scene enough that maybe it would have worked earlier, but then part of the reason it worked is that we had this relationship with Mother's Story, and we
Right.
You know, it was the punchline to a kind of simmering, unpleasant joke. I think the reason I like that scene, and I think a thing that governed a lot of how I thought about 14's relationship with violence, is that because of the way we roll dice, and because of the way that 14 is this kind of like lapsed assassin, we don't often get to see them being good at their job, or at least good at their job in the way that Castle Rose anticipates them to be.
Right.
Like, we see 14 being good at their job. Like, I think a lot about the Wyn's poem in the hotel room.
Yeah.
Like that's
With
14
the
using
batons, with the
the
cops.
skills they've learned to be like, all right, okay, I can do this. But I think the scene with Mother's story in the elevator is very much like, this is the Castle Rose assassin, and we're seeing 14 in that mode. But I think you're right. I think especially coming at that point in the story, there is something that feels disingenuous or that feels aestheticized about that. We got a question that was like, did 14 ever fire their gun? I think the exact words used were fancy gun, which is great because I'm pretty sure that's how we described it every time it came up.
It's a very fancy gun.
And the answer is no. And that is a conscious decision. I spent a lot of time thinking about, and you hear 14 say it on the show a lot. 14 admits, I haven't fired it, and I don't want to fire it, but I'm probably going to. Like 14 explicitly calls that out as like a, this is what I think will happen. But in context with the ways we were talking about violence and the ways we were talking about the utopias that we were thinking about, the idea of a gun in a desk drawer that isn't fired and is never mentioned again felt like a really powerful image to me.
Right.
And is one that I'm really glad we held off, because it'd be very easy to frame a scene where the gun is fired, and I'm so glad we didn't.
Right, or even a scene where Carcanet's Ironclad goes back and gets it during the Feast of Patina, right? Super interesting. We should talk to Andy, as people in the chat point out, like Echo's whole thing through the course of the season was whether they were willing to do violence or not. I don't mean to use that exact framing of are you willing to do violence or not, but that was part of their arc, right? It was like they're the bodyguard and they're willing to protect their friends, but also it's a big deal when the sword comes out, and so much of their interaction with Choir, the planet, was about violence. Andy, how did you think about violence this season, and especially in relation to the utopian stuff?
Specifically, what I was trying to do with Echo was, originally I just thought it'd be really cool to have a character that's good at cool action stuff.
Yeah.
But when they do it, you shouldn't be happy about it.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to try and land the fact that, like, yeah, Echo's been trained for this, but it does really take something away from them when they have to engage in the violence to an end that is so extreme as killing someone.
Yeah.
That's like why I tried to make it a thing when like the sword came out. At least I tried to be very good with that early on. I don't know how many times I did end up drawing it during the show, but I tried to make sure it was like a big deal that like Echo was going that far.
I think the inclusion of the hammer helped in the second half because the sword still kept that energy. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I'll use the hammer in combat against a barricade or against a spaceship, but when the sword comes out, that's okay, here we go.
Well, yeah, that was also the thing too. Was like, I really like the hammer because you could see that as being a tool, not just a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked it too, especially actually when Echo started to get like the angler and like the overture. Not just because I gotta have a cool mech.
It's so fucking cool though.
But because it added different ways to be like to protect people or to take action that would help protect people that Echo wanted to protect.
Right.
That weren't just like that scene in like early on where I was rescuing Grand from the Duke, I believe.
That's right.
Was his name at the time?
Yeah.
And I wanted like that was very much like that moment where I felt like, oh yeah, I need to make this thing like integral to the character arc.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think one of the things that ends up happening is, we don't really comment on it directly, but you get obsession also, right, as your status. Haunted. It was haunted. Right. Right. Which is Choir not wanting you to do violence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes on. We talked about it maybe a little bit in the finale. I mean, it's in the text, which is Choir says, "No more guns, please. No more. Don't shoot anybody." And it says, "I'm going to back Seneschal's Brace." And it also brings into being a city of people who do not want to be Seneschal's Brace and absolutely want to do violence against fascists in Parhelia. And it almost dreams into existence a society that can do what it cannot bring itself to, but what Choir cannot bring themselves to do. I'm going to use they them for Choir, even though I think I've done both in the past and think it could go either way. But I think that's important for one reason, because there was a conversation I actually had that was a really great conversation in the Discord. And the reason I'm having this conversation here is because I think it's important to remember that haunted status was not just, oh yeah, it makes sense that this is what Choir has given Echo the desire not to do violence. But that was a status in the sense that it was actually a difficulty and it wasn't an obstacle. And that, as Signet said, sometimes you have to shoot first. Because Choir could not bring itself to kick the fascists out. They certainly had the power to do that, I think. They certainly could have done some space magic shit that was like all of the Advent ships, all of the DFS ships, or all of the not the DFS ships probably, but the New Earth Hegemony ships all blow up, right? I suspect that was in their power. But part of the thing that came out of this great conversation I was having with someone in the Discord was that I one of the things I was trying to explain was, for me, Choir as a planet is... The planet will never save us from imperialism. Earth will never save us. Earth will, and this is how people write about this, this is how colonizers write about this, they will say that the Earth was opened itself up to them. It offered a bounty to them. It gave them so much. Colonizers will say that they will do more with the land than what's already been done. Look at the way businesses talk about China today, in which they talk about transforming the country of China. Just 30 years ago, there are only rice farmers in China. Say it says capitalism, right? This is the same thing that white Europeans said about the Americas and about Africa, about Asia, about Southeast Asia, about the entire world, often about other parts of Europe, right? In which colonizers moved in and said, no, we know how to get more out of this land than you do. And one of my goals here was not to make Choir the moral heart of this season, in the sense that I don't believe that Earth will ever save us. We need to save the Earth because it's what we fucking got, and we have to make that decision. We have to be the people, the actors here. Nature might reclaim us all one day after we destroy ourselves, but it isn't going to do the job for us. It's always going to make itself available for those who already have power, and they will use it to get more power. And so when Choir says, I need to make more of me so there's enough room for everybody, it's framed as a miracle because, like, in the moment, it's like, holy shit, this is incredible. We all have a place to live now. But immediately, the first scene of it, and it's such an important scene, is a group of people who aren't from there be like, all right, who gets what planets? And that includes Echo. Echo's in that conversation, deciding who gets what planets. And, like, that's how it works. The people who have power are going to carve up the thing and make it theirs. And so when Choir is like, no, don't do violence. Please don't hurt anybody. Part of that is like, it's bad. Like, Echo had to figure out not only, hey, even is maybe going too far here, but also, when is it worth me drawing that blade? And I think you did such a great job at playing that stuff, Andy. It really, really, really was great. Anything else here before we're almost done? We only have a couple more questions left because it's late.
I don't want to make all of this longer, so I'm just gonna be really quick. That I also tried to move away from violence this season and end up making an arms manufacturer.
Yeah, cool, buddy.
So sometimes you try something, it doesn't work, and you just gotta think and how you're gonna try next time.
How many bombs did you deliver this season? You personally? It was 3.
It's only 2.
Well, there was the bomb. One of them didn't go off. There is the downtime bomb. There's the Kitchikana bomb, and then there was the. Oh, did I make one up in my head?
No,
was
there's
there not a third one.
There's the downtime bomb, but when it goes off.
No, you're counting the same bomb twice. That's one bomb.
It's 2 deliveries.
And then sorry, when I said Kichikana bomb, I meant the bomb that blew up Kichikana.
Not the one you
then
delivered.
Then there was Kichikana's bomb.
Right.
That's like saying if you stop for gas when you're delivering a bomb, that's another bomb delivery. You guys are.
Well, it was a different intent. It was
have
you
a bonkers definition of bomb delivery.
Okay, I'll say there's 3 different things that you tried to blow up with a bomb.
Oh my god. Well, I don't think
to blow up.
Okay, we're moving on.
It's amazing how Grand Magnificent has arrived on this postmortem.
I just
So,
think words need to have meaning. Is what I'm saying.
as always, I'm trying to completely dissolve it. From Joe, which builds on something that I think, Jack, you were just talking about. Joe says, so as Twilight Mirage went along, it felt like there was less playing to find out what happens and more talking to find out what you wanted to happen. The best example of this is the scene where Gran traded independence to save 1415. This happens in my games as well, and I was wondering, do you feel the same way? Do you have any ideas how to combat this in play? And like my super gut reaction is like lean in.
Oh yeah.
Talking about it is playing to find out what happens.
That's all we're doing.
Right.
Talking.
Playing doesn't only mean being in character. It as much means putting your head on your microphone and going like, I don't know how you get out of this situation. Like, what do we want this scene to be? Is play. It's one of the reasons I love doing this with you all so much.
Hold on, real quick. I don't know if Joe has a microphone.
True. Joe could have a desk and be like, ugh, and hands on head. I don't know what their situation is. Fair. But you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I know what you mean, yeah.
For me, I conceive of the show as when Signet and Tender, when Janine and Allie and I go like, wait a second, Janine, you're doing this on purpose, right? You're torturing Tender here, right? That is the play as much as Janine in character torturing Tender.
I think something that we're really lucky that makes us really lucky is that we have a show to do, and so we get to keep that in mind all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we talked about this on the last episode of the table, but I think because it was me that was talking to other people like their D&D games were a show or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But like thinking about your regular ass campaign like it's a show is super helpful. It really does a lot because it is a show. It's just for you and your friends at the table,
and it's rad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts here though on this on this part of the show, which I think that Joe is 100% true in that like we did way more of this, partially because the Veil is just that game, right? The Veil from the jump is, why are you doing this? How do you feel? Let's talk about what you want to happen in this scene,
I think there's a time and a place for it. And I don't want, by saying I think there's a time and a place for it, I don't want that to come off pejoratively.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just as you're talking about, that is a mode of play, I think something that I hope comes across that we work hard on in the show is displaying different ways you can play tabletop games.
Right.
I think I don't know. When I was in that scene with Art, it felt very important to me that we had that space to step out of the characters and discuss what we wanted to do. In part because this situation in the game was one that was so precarious. And it felt like we had to make a decision in a way that was careful. Otherwise, it could go like actually extremely nastily. And then there are other times where you just want to just play as the characters, play the voiced characters, see what happens. But I don't think that there is anything less by saying, all right, what do we actually want here? I think you've been really good at that this season, Art, of like explicitly saying, like, where do I want to take this character? Where are you interested in seeing this character go? And I think that that's something that we couldn't have a character like Grand without.
Right, because
I
then
don't
you...
remember. Oh, sorry.
No, you answer.
I don't remember what gaming book it was that first was like, you should use dramatic irony in gaming, because clearly I took that all the way to heart.
You ate it. You were so excited about it that you ate it.
And it didn't go to your stomach, it went to your heart.
I'm definitely the wishy-washiest player in terms of like talking out what the next thing is going to be, and sometimes that's great moments like the thing with the ring in the hand in Winter, and sometimes it's just, I'm sure Allie just has virtual piles and piles of me just hemming and hawing over literally nothing. But yeah, but I do think it's important that like once you can't win the game. So you should just be trying to do the game as best you can, and that comes from using the fact that players and characters have different knowledge.
Right. Yeah. Always.
Two things there. One, Fiery in the chat says, do you think there was a scenario in which 1415 died during that scene? Absolutely. Constantly.
Yeah.
Always. Like we got a lot of questions that were like, well, could have things gone differently here or there? And the answer is almost always yes. Like, you look at my notes from this beginning of the season, Indela Apagica is the big bad. Indela Apagica and Independence are the big bads, and you don't even see Independence until, like, April or something, you know? Like, that's the way that game was.
That was probably we were going to wrap in May.
Right, 100%. Like, it was supposed to be this big finale thing. I mean, and that, I think, speaks to something else about Joe's question here of, like, the conversation of, or maybe it actually speaks to Jack saying there's a time and a place, in a way that's not, you know, definitive. But the beginning of the season, the ground game had nothing but like what play to find out what happened, right?
Yeah.
And maybe needed a little bit more off mic or out of character at least. Hey, what do we want this show to be? What do you want to do this week in this show? Because what I did was give everybody a map and said, all right, go places. Let me know what you do. And it turns out that that was not a great format for exploring the setting or ideas, partially because it's going to be a long year no matter what, and exploration is going to take a lot longer than we ever think it will, but partially because it was so directionless and it wasn't tied to character flags. It was tied to what was already in the world, and we were not having enough of that, hey, what do we want to have happen here in the meta broad sense and not the close-up sense, you know? And so, yeah, like, that is like, basically a thing that's true no matter what. There's always the possibility of things going in a different direction, because so much of what happens is just the thing that happens in play. There is no arc that we had that went the way I thought it would go at all. Like, I'm trying to think of any that was like, maybe the arc game. The arc game went the way I thought it would go, which is y'all would side with the kids and would help them become sustainable. But I did not anticipate the methods of that stuff. I did not anticipate roller skating rinks or conversations with the kids in order to find out different ways to get into the big garage, stuff like that I didn't anticipate. But beyond that one, like, over and over again, I was surprised and had to roll with it. And again, I've mentioned this on a Tips episode recently, but one of my favorite things about Action Movie World and Worldwide Wrestling RPG is they both have this principle for the GM, which is make it seem like it was always planned this way. And y'all make me do that all of the time, which is like, all right, fuck, they went left. I thought they were going north, and they went left. That's not even the same thing. Who even knows? And the job is to try to, like, make sense of it all. So yeah. Any other thoughts on this stuff?
It is such a thing of, like, there is a line to walk. Like, there's definitely, like, a situation where someone starts up the conversation that isn't what happens next, but here's what I want to happen next. And, like, sometimes that works too, and also sometimes that's, like, a thing that has been, you know, they've worked it over in their head. It's like the perfect situation, and, you know, I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the thing they want to unfold this particular way, and that being open to the change, I think, is the key. Like, we're not relying 100% on dice rolls. We're not relying 100% on, like, this kind of Mad Lib, whatever happens thing. We are trying to be more thoughtful about the story we're telling, and we do also enter into it with certain ideas. Like, I went into the finale 100% sure Signet would die. Like,
Right.
That was, to me, that seemed like the thing that happens is we're not shy about killing characters off in the finale, and she's been alive for a very long time, and, like, emotionally the thing she was best at is kind of fucked up.
Right.
And, like, the easy choice is totally, oh well, she dies now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not at all what like, the complete opposite happened. And that's 100% a function of just, like, playing and being like, well, actually, it doesn't feel like she dies here. It doesn't feel like this is how this goes.
Yeah.
And you just have to, like, be open to seeing that stuff play out.
Yeah, otherwise it's just like I mean, the other thing that happens is you can get in your head and be like, okay, this is the thing that has to happen, and then it can't, right?
Mhm.
And so you have to
And
make
that
a
also,
turn.
yeah, that also wasn't like it wasn't like she was going to stay alive or die based on a single dice roll or whatever. Like it
Right.
was not, most games give you that room. At least a lot of games give you that room. And like I don't think it's a bad thing to take advantage of that and just, put together a real like story and not like a Mad Lib kind of thing. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right, totally. Okay, there was nothing. Oh, I thought of another incredible moment that I wanted to shout out from a player, which was early in the season, super early in the season. There's a moment where even Gardner sees Janie Surge, Janie Irania was her last name, working on this kind of like 3D painting of her and the Doyen, and does not intrude and does not try to find out what it is. And I love that moment because it was one of those things of like this player is thinking about how his character would actually act in this moment, which is give this person privacy as they are in a very sad state. And I really, really loved that bit a lot. All right. One more question. Does that sound good? Unless anyone else has something else here. Okay. This one comes in from Emily, who says, "This season has been described as ambitious and experimental. How did Twilight Mirage help you grow as a player, GM, or storyteller? What were new things you tried that you think worked or didn't work? Did you try anything new that you'd like to carry with you to future seasons?" I think I've already answered this between the open map stuff in the ground game, corrective, all sorts of stuff that we tried to do here. That like I think that's been most of my answers here. So I'm curious for you as players. And as storytellers also, what were some new things that you tried that worked or that didn't? I'm just giving you time and space here to really think through it. I can call out names and things to see things that I'm curious about, but I mean, we already kind of hit one with Art and Grand as being like, you assumed Grand would be this joke character versus your traditional tragic ones.
And I mean, Grand was certainly was lighter. Part of this, and this isn't really an answer to this, is there's such a great pressure release valve now in our non-main feed content.
Yeah.
That like it's just so much less. It's so much less involved, I'm instead of thinking about one person for 8 or 9 months or 14 in this case, I got to have side hustles,
Yeah.
I got to really think about Jake the Jackal.
Fantastic character. People who don't know who Jake the Jackal is, let me tell you, you're missing out. Anybody else here feel like they took a new direction with a character or as a player or anything like that? I mean, Jack, you both kind of doubled down on playing multiple characters and also didn't do that. You also played one character, like, so core to them is to 14-15 is that they are one person and not 4 people on screen.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that I chose to play a character like that, to play a character, that was embodied in different ways, was to challenge me to think about the ways in which you can portray a character on 2 levels, right? The ways in which you can portray 3 or 4 distinct personalities and distinct appearances, while also trying to maintain this, because it's fun to set yourself a challenge at the beginning of what will turn out to be the most complicated season of a podcast we've ever made.
Ugh.
But it was a lot of fun, and I really hope that each of 14's kind of incarnations came across as a distinct entity, while also absolutely at the same time being 14-15. We spent the most time with the body politic, so I think there's a tendency, even for myself, to think of that as sort of like, that's 14, but that's nonsense. That's bullshit. 14, was 100 bodies before we met them.
Right.
And I think if you can get to the end of the season and sort of think of 14 as not really be able to go, well, which one of these is 14? Then if that's the case, I hope that we've gotten to a point where it worked.
Yeah,
But it was very difficult.
it's one of the reasons I really love that one of the most recent pieces of fan artwork from Annie, from Dancy Nuru on Twitter. That
Dancy
is...
Nuru. I said it in a Let's Play recently, and it's a great thing to say out
He
loud.
said it like 6 times. You just said it over and over again.
It was very enjoyable to say.
That drawing is Carcanet's Ironclads. It's their like metal helmet opened up, and inside you can see the body politic, worthy of grace, and the gunslinger. Yeah, all inside, and that is it feels like there's such a unity of being, even though there's distinction inside, you know.
Yeah. Also drums. I learned how to write drums.
That's a big one. And boy, you did a fucking great job. I fucking love it so much. The first time you sent me the morning's observation track from the argument inside of the beloved ship.
The sleep detachment.
The sleep detachment on sleep detachment. Oh my god. I was like, yo, there's drums in this and they are for real the best. So fantastic.
Will I carry it forward? No drums in Hyron.
Well, you know, there's some people who have
drums in Hyron.
That's not true. Your first drums were in Hyron.
One drums in Hyron.
One drums in Hyron. Hell yeah.
Is that a liter? You're using a. Are you, Jack? Where are your drums coming from?
It's a great question, Art. A computer.
Okay, that's why I didn't know how to phrase that. Like
They're digital. They're digital drums.
All right.
It's like a drum machine, and it's a sample of like a drum set called Bluebird, which I don't know why it's called that, but that's the one I use.
A tattoo of a bluebird.
Yeah, tattoo of a bluebird.
I'll say 2 other real quick things for me, unless other people have one here.
I have something real quick, but you can
sure.
go first.
Okay, well, I'll do one of mine, which is take into account the year you're having before beginning a project. This has not been a great year for me as a brain person, as a person who has a brain. Has been a year of being deeply overworked at my day job, and deeply frustrated with culture and with life, and one in which, you know, I was stuck in traffic coming home from work knowing that this was coming and still couldn't get out in time, and decided to do the most ambitious season of our podcast yet, instead of doing something much simpler. The good news is I think the next 2 seasons I have in mind are much simpler things, or really anything else we have in mind in general. You know, Bluff City is complicated, and I think we'll still do some live games that really get out there in terms of ambition and experimentation, and we'll find other ways of being ambitious. But in terms of pure, like, tackling ideas, this was the hardest project I've had probably ever, in terms of like the complexity of trying to get these ideas down in a way that I could be proud of. Meanwhile, trying to launch a website that was doing something similar in the space of video games, and coming out feeling like neither hit the speeds I wanted, hit the velocities and found their smoothness. And it's just like, be fucking aware of what you're working on, and like be aware of how far you can push yourself and what projects to kind of prioritize, which isn't to say, like, I think the messiness ended up making this more honest in a lot of ways. It's not a novel. It is an actual play podcast. But knowing that stuff would have helped me, I think, scale a little bit different. Like, I'm very curious of myself to think about, like, what if the Twilight Mirage had been a Marielda mini-season or something? Or like a world that we set up like Bluff City that we always revisit from different places. And so one of the biggest lessons for me is, like, think about that stuff ahead of time and be willing to scale and be experimental, not only with content, but with form. So that was really useful.
Jumping on the, like, what kind of year you're having.
Yeah.
This is like an answer I wanted to give and never found the question for. So this is the last question. So it's happening. Which is the year that I had is sort of like the reason Grand has that dark turn.
Right.
Four of my close friends moved away in the spring and summer of this year. And so I think that's why I was thinking so much about like, what is friendship? Who are my friends? And then it's like, none of these assholes. Fuck them. The characters, of course, you all are precious to me. And like, yeah, that is, and that's, I couldn't plan for that, of course, although 3 of them moved because they got academic jobs, which was a little predictable in hindsight, but I just assumed everyone would keep not getting jobs.
Right, that's all.
Yeah. So like, yeah, that's that. That's the answer I wanted to give and didn't get a perfect question for. So, sorry, format nerds.
God. Yeah, Keith, you also had one here.
Yeah, my thing. Jack reminded me of this. So it's not. I guess it's not a new thing. It's sort of my persistent cop out for characterization. But the thing that I hope with Gig is the thing that I have hoped with since Mako, which is that like there's some sort of like interesting line that you can draw through Pharaoh and Mako and Gig and feel something about like me in there, and I don't really know how to articulate it because it's like 4 years of a podcast worth of articulation.
Yeah.
So the best that I can hope is that like someone that's listened to it all comes out of it and goes like, oh, this is 4 years worth of something that Keith wanted to say.
Sure.
Yeah, and then the trick then is going back to characters that I've played before and having to do a thing that I was doing 4 years ago. So I'm re-listening to Hyron to be like, who's Pharaoh?
Yeah, I'm listening to it too.
Who was I? What was I doing 4 years ago that was anything?
Which is going to get even more complicated as we figure out what spring is, right? And how spring works. So I'm looking forward to that. I had another one, but maybe I lost it. Maybe that's okay. Does anyone else?
Did you ever remember your other scene?
Yeah, I've now in fact given 2 more scenes, which were the tender Caden, tender Caden, and then even Janie. I think the last one for me here is one of the biggest ones was definitely. Nope, I've lost it. It's gone. I thought I found it, and I didn't, and that's totally okay. Anyone else have anything? Okay. I think that's it then. I think that's the end of our post-mortem. Thank you so much for everyone who... Oh, nope, I remember what it was. It is thinking about the next time we do a show in a Forge in the Dark system. And it's one of the reasons why I'm super interested in... So I don't have an announcement about... We don't have a trailer for spring because we've not started recording it yet because we've all been traveling and working on the finale. This has been the biggest, weirdest finale we've ever done. 2, I'm not saying promises about next future seasons or whatever. I don't want to be like, this is the game we're playing in a year, because who the fuck knows? But when I'm looking at games, one of the ones that stands out to me is Beam Saber, which is a mech Forge in the Dark game, for 2 reasons. One, despite doing 2 seasons all about mechs, neither of them have really been about mechs. There have been mechs in them, but they haven't really been the thing. So I think I still have like a big Gundam in me. 2, it does the thing that I fucking learned twice in 2 different seasons, which is, and I think it does, it seems like it's going to do the thing that, like, I care about the most. I have to experiment with it, and who the fuck knows, but the lesson is figure out how to have the nuance of a bunch of factions with also the buckets of a few factions. I love the faction stuff in this season and in Counterweight and in Marielda. In each case, there have been many listeners for whom that is overwhelming, and that is a genuine concern. It's not a concern in Hyron, because Hyron isn't built that way, and I mean that thematically as much as mechanically. But a thing that reading Beam Saber reminded me of, but also a thing that we did in Counterweight and a thing that we do here eventually, is that by bucketing a bunch of sub-factions into a larger bucket faction, you can communicate something quickly without it being overwhelming. And so the Advent group and then eventually the Quaer coalition And the DFS, which is actually like 7 factions inside of it, the NEH, which is like 7 or 8 factions inside of it, end up being really useful shorthand to gesturing towards a kind of amalgamation of a bunch of different things, and being able to get to that quicker while still being able to have the deep bucket that you need as a GM to reach in and be like, oh, here's who handles the economic concern on Skane. Here's where the space cop who's been chasing Grand around space for a while is from, and being able to give her specific character comes from having that pre-built list of factions, right? Like Scum and Villainy ships with 40 factions or something, and they are not bucketed in the way that we ended up doing it. And for me, it's like, hey, the shortcut here is to, on the prep side, have those, but on the play side, function first and foremost with, here are the buckets they're representing. Here's what the NEH is doing. You don't need to know immediately about the 7 or 8 different sub-factions inside of the... 36. It's 36 factions in Scum and Villainy, and it's about the same in Blades, right? Marialda had the same. And so it's like, how do we make sure that those things are clear right from the gate? And that is super useful in storytelling in general, because once you have those big picture things in place, you can then kind of start to dig in, because everyone has the same basic, like, shared knowledge of who are the major players, if that makes sense. So again, no promises that we're going to play Beam Saber. I'm looking at a bunch of games for the whenever we return to this universe. There are a bunch of mech games coming out, it turns out, between that and Lancer, and I just saw another new one, All Systems Nominal, another Forged in the Dark mech game that I have to read. But that is one of the things that I know I'll have in mind, is like, I want the depth of world that having the factions prepped gives you, but I also want the clarity of grouping them, which we did eventually. But you know, anyway, all right.
Wait.
Present. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, you reminded me of an answer I have for this.
Oh, sure.
The thing that Twilight Mirage, I think, helped me like really get my head around in a way that it's like a thing I hadn't really thought of, I think, properly before. I had it all worked out in my head how I was going to express this, and I'm like, I have not. I think because Friends at the Table is my first sort of spending time with these kinds of games, and I think I placed a lot of not reliance, but I sort of believed that a game's systems could imbue a certain energy into the play. And there are a lot of games that we've played that do kind of demonstrate that, and I think like sort of reinforce that idea for me. But through the course of Twilight Mirage, I think I got a better understanding of like, this is a thing that I said to Jack like last week or something, which is that like, I think if we had done Scum and Villainy to start with, I would have a really different impression of Scum and Villainy as a game versus the Veil, because I associate the Veil with a slightly more boisterous thing than I associate Scum and Villainy. And Scum and Villainy is, that was sort of the whole thing with bringing in Scum and Villainy was like, it's associated with Blades in the Dark, which was Marialda, and there's like a boisterousness to Marialda, and I had just kind of assumed that was part of like a systems thing, and a lot of it just, that's not all of it. Like, their systems lend themselves well to certain tones and things, but that's not
the be all.
I was placing too much weight on that. Yeah.
I there's definitely part. I mean, again, one of the questions that came in that we won't give a lot of time to is just like, hey, how did you figure out Futura Free as a system? Which is like, lots of me being in chat with y'all being like, I don't know what to do. What are we doing? What's important? And that ended up being, again, another question that it comes back to that question Joe asked of like talking about what you want to be doing. And it ended up being so useful to talk through with y'all, like what your priorities were for the finale in terms of not the outcome, because the outcome was never assured. Like, this could have gone bad so easily it could have gone bad. But in terms of, I think about this a lot in terms of windows, or like if you imagine a spectrum of like tragedy on one end and comedy on the other end, right? Where is that window out at? And as a designer, how could I build something that allowed for a certain window? And so something like letting you spend contempt tokens as a resource slides that in towards comedy and away from tragedy, right? Because it gives you a resource by which you can enact change in the world that you can also regenerate when bad things happen. So there was some thought of that to like help push it in that direction, but it still could have gone incredibly poorly for everybody. There are cards you did draw, there are cards you didn't draw, there are things that like could have happened or didn't happen or whatever. And on top of that, there is just the other half of that I learned was like learning to let go of that stuff. So like when and Jack can speak to this, that when we did our test game, one of the things that I had told Jack was like, I have events that are tied to certain cards that are like, oh, I know what happens when this card is drawn. And the only time we ended up using that in play was the Kings that drew. Like when the Kings drew, I'd put on new clocks and I narrated one or two events. So that was like Keen talking about the arrival of the impending arrival of Crystal Palace, but I hated how it played out, so I immediately ditched those. And so that's the other big one, is just like knowing when to let go of that stuff, even mechanically, because while sometimes it can help present a specific tone, whether that is a jauntiness, that's not the word you said. What was the word you said, Janine, to describe? Boisterousness. Or to present a sort of like deep, like feeling of like cynicism and fear. Games can do that stuff, but there's enough time. There's time when you have to let go and let the players drive that action, especially. So that is another big one for sure. Yeah, I don't know what happens if the remove a threat from the map card doesn't come up. I have no idea. What happens. I'm so curious to know. Anything else here before we wrap? Okay. So, before we wrap, the last thing I want to note, one, if you have questions and are curious about other stuff, you can always send it to tipsathetable@gmail.com, which is where we get our questions to do our Tips at the Table episodes. And if you don't know what that is, it's part of our Patreon. Every month, we answer tips about everything from how to talk to your GM about a plotline you don't love, to how to prep for a system change of your own, to how to bring up romantic stuff at the table, to like what are snacks? How do you do snacks? How do you do microphones? We kind of do as much as we can in that space. So if you have questions, you can send those to tipsathetable@gmail.com. But two, we are going to do, and this has already been announced on Twitter, some of us are going to be at Shucks, which is the Shut Up and Sit Down convention in Vancouver in October. Does anyone remember the dates?
October 12th to the 14th.
Yeah.
Right.
And our event will be on Saturday.
Awesome.
Presumably.
Yeah,
Maybe.
they said that. They said maybe.
They told us
We
it's
don't have a
gonna be on
time,
Saturday.
but we have a day.
Right, but also that kind of doesn't matter because as far as I know, they don't have single day tickets, right? They only have weekend tickets.
Right, but if you don't want to go, if you're like, well, I can get to Vancouver, but only for 12 hours, you pick the 12 hours between like, let's say 10 and 10 on Saturday.
Totally. Jack, do you want to tell the story of how this happened, since I blame you?
Mm-hmm.
Blame's an interesting word here. It's interesting that you just picked the word blame here.
Oh, I picked the word blame.
Thank you.
Well, okay. So I had already been planning on going to Chuck's. I was thinking of just going and guesting on a couple of panels, and maybe just running a game for like 3 people as part of a panel. Just be like, oh, I might run like Dream Askew or something. And I mentioned this to Art when I was in Los Angeles, and Art was like, oh, I should come. That'd be great. You and I can run a game for 2 other people. And then I was like, that seems interesting. So I mentioned that Art and I were thinking about this to Austin, and Austin was like, oh, yes, I would love to come. And at that point, when it's
Okay,
Austin...
you're now summarizing a lot, but...
At that point, when it's Austin, Art, and me, we should probably, run a game.
You're eliding a very important fact of pressure.
Which fact am I eliding here?
The one is, I had already been invited, and I was like, no, I don't want to go. Or I was like, no, I can't go. I would love to go, but work. And in my heart of hearts, I always wanted to go, which is an important one. And so you, someone who I trust and love, saying, what if we did this thing? Was just so tempting. But more importantly, what you said was, all right, we have one day to decide if we're going to do this or not. Tomorrow,
I was telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I had 4 days, and I still waited until the last day.
We had a deadline to hit, and Austin and I were in a room. And
As we
Austin
often
was
are.
just like, let's do it. So
What
we
kind
did
of
it.
room? What color
It
were
was
the walls?
like yellow.
Yellowish?
Carpeted or hardwood?
Hardwood.
Hardwood. You
Is
were in
it,
a
wait,
hardwood,
were we in my
yellow-walled room.
living room, or were we
Yeah,
out in the world?
wooden floors, but not wooden walls.
Not wooden
Okay, so-
walls.
Tell me exactly what happened in the hardwooded, yellow-walled room.
Well, so then we filled in a very complicated form, and then we were apparently doing something.
Which had
and
a
then
hard question on it, which I'm still not sure we answered right. I don't know.
What was the question? Well, how hard was it?
What is this show?
What is this show?
What is this? What is this?
Is it a theatrical performance or is it a live game? Anyway.
Is it a live game?
Anyway,
yeah, is it a theatrical performance or is it a
then the
live
next
game?
day,
I said
after-
live
We're going to
game.
be doing the Bye Bye Greasy episode of Home Movies. as a play.
Yes, we are. Anyway, the next day,
The second act.
after the second act, after an interesting and eventful meeting that already took a lot of thinking about,
Oh yeah.
Austin and I said to Ali, we've done a thing.
Ahem. We did it. We did a bad. We did one bad. But might be a
We-
good.
But might be a good.
We were walking down the street. I was not prepared for this.
We were walking until we stopped walking down the street, and you said,
Where did you stop walking over the cross?
I can tell you the specific place we were. Do you remember where we were? Do you remember
Was
what
it
we
outside the Church of Most Precious Blood?
It was outside the Church of Most Precious Blood.
Oh, let's do this with y'all.
I love doing this. Name of the year in the chat says, a real-life Austin and Jack conversation or anecdote still managed to include bureaucratic form filling.
Yeah, it fucking did. It fucking did, I tell you. Anyway, this story is brought to us by the patience of everybody, especially Ali. But all this is to say that we're going to be at Shucks and we're going to be playing something.
We don't know what exactly yet. We have some ideas, but nothing to
Tag.
announce. Tag. Yeah, we're going to play tag.
Oh, hell yeah.
Transition to some jacks.
We could do some jacks. We could do all sorts. Maybe we'll play 6
We're
different
gonna bring
games.
Jack back.
Exactly. We're bringing it back.
We're going to
bringing
bring
Jack.
Jack...
Marbles.
We're bringing Jack Black.
That's it. Jack Black will be our special guest
Is
on.
Kyle Gass going to be there?
No, not allowed. Decided.
Not allowed.
Don't like
he's
your name.
banned from Shucks.
Yeah, banned from Shucks. No Tenacious D, just Jack Black. But he'll be doing School of Rock cosplay, so it all adds up. It's fine.
They're putting us in such a big room. It's really going to be embarrassing for us.
Yeah, it's gonna be bad. It's fine. It's fine.
Everyone just bring a pillow with an extra jacket and an extra hat on it. And then just like put that beside you and it'll fill everything out. It'll be great.
It'll be great.
The thing I will
just
say
comfy.
is you can buy tickets to Shucks by I'll put a link in chat. But I will say that they are close to not having any tickets anymore. So if it's something that you're thinking about doing and it's something that you're able to do, I would recommend maybe going for it sooner rather than later.
Right.
I'm gonna post and paste a link.
Attached to that.
Yes. I'll note. Oh, go ahead. What
Yeah,
do you?
go on.
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say 2 very important things that like very last minute international travel is not a possibility for a lot of people. So like
Yes.
as someone
Right.
who
Including me, maybe.
as someone who like skipped meals and sold my textbooks to go to Kanye West concerts, I fully understand it, but like this is gonna be our first live show. It's probably not gonna be the last.
Yeah.
If you can't make it, you can't make it. It's fine. This is just kind of us being like, oh, to be able to do this in the future, we just have to do it. So we're just gonna say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
To do it, do it.
The second very important thing is that Shucks does put their panels on their YouTube.
Oh, awesome! I
They
did not know
typically
that.
don't. Yeah, they typically don't do it until like a couple months after the con. It probably won't be until like 2019, but like that stuff is going to be recorded and you were going to see it if you can't be there. So like I know a lot of people in the audience are probably like, oh, what the fuck? Like, why are you doing this? And like I understand.
And to give you an idea of how small a show Shucks is, we brought their website down, it looks like. And
What?
there's only 390 people watching this, so...
Oh,
No.
No, we didn't do that, did we?
True.
Oh,
No,
no.
I went there earlier and it didn't. I went there like
It's just-
5 hours ago and it was a little hit and miss. So I
Okay.
think it's just that it's,
They're in the UK. It's far
I like
from...
your version more.
Yeah, when you guys brought this up, you said, "Hey, we're gonna do this. So if anyone wants to come," and I was like, I don't have a passport." And you guys were like, "Well, you could just get a passport." And I was like, "I don't have a birth certificate to get a passport because I lost my birth certificate, and also I lost my social security card."
Keith.
We can't help you if you can't prove who you are.
Well,
I
I
have
did
some difficulties at that point.
a couple days ago. I ordered a rush ordered a birth certificate. So we'll see how
I
it goes.
fully thought you were going to say a fake passport. I was
Well,
worried.
Listen,
No one confessed to crimes
is anyone
on
driving?
stream.
Is anyone driving across the border? I will hide in the trunk. That's
No,
cool
no,
with
no,
me.
no. We can't say this.
How long could they possibly detain me for? Right?
Oh my god.
Long enough.
Yeah.
Long enough.
Cue the music.
All right, that's going to do it for us. As always, thank you so much for your support in every possible different way. If one of the ways you'd like to give us support is monetarily, which again is a thing that I'm not going to say I'm not going to say thank you for, but I am going to say thank you for all different types of support. But if you do want to toss us a couple bucks, you can do that at friendsattetable.cash. We are, like I said at the beginning of the episode, we are definitely back on some stuff there, but we are going to be catching up in the near future. I'm super excited to run our masks game for Bluff City. I have it's all prepped out. I just need to find the time to do it. It has been a joy to do the Twilight Mirage with y'all. I am so lucky to be able to play games with you all. We when we all kicked this off, it was like such a I'd love to play games with my friends thing, and I'm going to tell you the secret. It still is. That is still the heart of this for me, is every week I look forward to sitting down with y'all, speaking into microphones, going onto Roll20, and being absolutely surprised by the thoughtfulness, the care, and the kind of brilliance you all bring to your characters, and the ways in which we get to build worlds together. It blows my mind. It blows my mind not only that I'm lucky enough to have people support us on Patreon, but that I have been lucky enough to have you all in my life. I went a long time not being able to play games at all, and now I get to play them with the best people in the world. So thank you all so much. I love you all. I love you in the chat. That is going to do it for us. You know where to find us. One more little thing. We are going to put a previously Patreon only mini arc in the main feed over the next few weeks. It is going to be the game that we played of
Are you buying time? Fall of Magic.
Fall of Magic. I forgot that I was going to say
I couldn't tell if you were being dramatic or not, or if it had a new name.
I genuinely almost said the scrolly one, the one with scrolls. Fall of Magic, one of my very favorite games we ever played. I really hope for people who don't follow us on the Patreon, I really hope you enjoy it, and I think it gives a pretty good snapshot of what we do over on the Patreon. It is super good. I'm super excited for people to hear it. It's also fun because it's a thing we recorded over 6 or 7 months of individual recordings, once a month, every other month, which means that there's a dreamlike weirdness to it, because we're always like, wait, what did we do last time? Were you were some sort of dog? What? So look forward to that. If you've already heard it, please enjoy the re-listen. We need the time to get things up and running on spring. So thank you again so much. That is going to do it for us. Talk to you all very, very soon.
Bye.
Peace.
Bye.
Bye.